What did a crazy stalker do because they had a crush on you? He asked to meet. I told him I wasn't home. He answered with, "But your light's on." He lived nowhere near me. My street is a cul-de-sac, so there's no reason he was passing by. He was creepy in many other ways as well. He told people we were in love. Nope. That we had forbidden love. Nope. And kept messaging me for years. I stopped responding in the first year. I was between 15 to 23 and he was 23 to 31. Even when I was living in another city, he kept telling people about our love. He acted like a normal, sweet guy, so people had trouble believing me. I had to deny more than once that I'd ever kissed him, and I was his friend briefly when I was 15 and ignored him. It only stopped when I randomly met a friend of his in the city I live in and showed him all of the messages. The guy was shocked. As far as I know, his friend talked with him and he finally stopped. Curiously, he began dating a girl with the same name as mine. Creepy as frick. He proposed marriage so aggressively that he had to be escorted off the premises, and then later broke the lock off my dorm room and tried to get into bed with me. I invited her to hang out. She was already outside my place waiting for the call. Took pictures of me while I slept. There was a group of us all sleeping in one room. I woke up to see him taking photos of me. Plucked a hair off of my jacket and ate it in front of me. He broke into my cousin's house and stole my guinea pig to feed to a snake because I wouldn't break up with my boyfriend to date him. She sent me threatening pictures after she found out I had a girlfriend. My state's psychiatric care is a joke. I had her hospitalized multiple times, and they'd first pump her full of drugs and send her home. The police were an even bigger joke, and they couldn't understand why a guy wouldn't want a beautiful woman to be obsessed with them. They didn't seem to understand that I needed a restraining order not only for my own safety, but to keep her safe from herself. I inevitably had to be moved out of state, change banks, phone companies, jobs, and I dropped off social media just to have a life that existed outside of her. Several years later, she did thank me for it. Good on you for doing what you could to get away for both of your sakes, and to her for recognizing that she had an issue. Hopefully you managed to get an even better life in your new setting. Found out he'd been telling my co-workers that we'd been dating for weeks, when in reality I'd never spoken to the guy in my life. Found out when I was asked about my crazy weekend with my boyfriend, when I am in fact single as all hell. This was a while ago, in high school, so I don't know if I can really fault him for being an idiot, but he told everyone we knew that I was his dream girl and that we were going to get married. He actively sought out rumors of who I was crushing on, or who was crushing on me, or just any guy who had talked to me and tell them to please let him have the chance and to not ask me out. Weirdest thing was I didn't even really talk to him and didn't even know his last name. I just said hi during calculus every day. Wrote racy fictional material about me in which I said, "Stop, I'm only 16. He was in his mid-20s at the time. Walked a good 5 miles with me because she was going my way. I was almost home before I found out she lived 30 seconds from the pub I met her in. She said she'd have to stay at mine as it wasn't safe for her to walk home alone. I ended up having to explain that I wasn't attracted to her and had to call her a taxi home and pay for it. Wrote a love letter in blood. Somehow, the teacher got hold of it, and then the whole school found out. I had someone I worked with at a movie theater ask me out, and I told them I wasn't looking for a boyfriend. So, the next time he was closing and I was opening the next morning, he poured popcorn salt all over the office desk and shaped it to say, "Die," and then my name. One of my brother's friends tried to impress a girl by shoving his whole hand down his throat. They stole my hat and refused to give it back because it smelled like me. Paid someone to attack me so they could rescue me. Didn't work. Hit the attacker with a book bag, pinned him down. He started yelling that he had been paid to do it just as the other guy showed up. I was on my way home from work, he knew my schedule, and I took the bus. A junior in high school tried to tickle my pickle in front of my friend when I was a senior because she thought I was cute. This isn't the only advance she made, but after this, she lost her mind a bit. I used to be a mall cop, and one of the girls at the frozen yogurt place asked me to prom publicly on Instagram as her Man Crush Monday. I was 20 and out of the high school mindset, so it was pretty embarrassing. I politely declined, and the post came down. Not really disturbing, I just always felt so bad that she shot her shot so publicly for it to not work out. These comments make me really glad that I'm ugly. This guy I knew for a while went out of his way to introduce himself to me. He was nice enough. We hung out in a group sometimes. Eventually, he started to do weird stuff. He asked me where I'd bought some new clothes, and then I saw him the next week wearing the exact same clothes, the shirt and jeans and shoes. Then I started seeing his car in my street at random times of the night. I got up to go to the bathroom one night and to let my cat in, and he was sitting in his car watching my house. I wasn't scared of this guy, he was weaker than me, but it was really weird. He'd call me and put me on speakerphone and then record our conversations. I found this out from a mutual friend. Anyway, I made sure he knew I didn't like it, and I stopped hanging out with that group of friends. Then a few months later, I received a call from one of my best friends who told me a story about the same guy who'd copied his exact hair color, which was red and black and blonde at the time. Since then, we always think back to this guy and laugh. We call him Stalker Adam. To be fair, he wasn't dangerous. I think he was just awkward and lonely and didn't know how to cope with his feelings. Snapped my bra strap to get my attention. Put a pipe bomb in my husband's truck. Hey, free pipe bomb though. She stole a bunch of my homework and then asked me out in a very passive-aggressive manner. Then she followed me home, rang my doorbell, and demanded I go out with her. We were 14 and her parents drove her. I think I just told her to go home and close the door. I didn't really know how to deal with sociopaths back then, and she took it pretty badly. She did not leave me alone after that. Frequent calls and shaming, but she didn't do anything crazy and it didn't really escalate. I don't know if this counts, but I broke up with an ex because I just wasn't into her. Started dating a new girl and ran into my ex at a party a few weeks ago. She pulled me into the bathroom and showed me her thigh in which she had carved my name into it, claiming she still loved me and we'd only dated a month. I was a 19-year-old waitress at the time, and a 49-year-old man that I'd served tried to connect with me through the missed connections page on Craigslist. He then came to my work and professed his love for me in a Christmas card that ironically had a cartoon of Santa being kicked in the nads by a child with the caption, "Stranger Danger." In his note, he said he wasn't sure if I'd be interested in an older man and he had a wife and children, so we'd have to find a way around that little detail. I didn't feel safe at work, so I had the police intervene and tell him not to bother me again. Well, even if literally every other thing this man did wasn't a glaring red flag, that card showing that child safety was going too far told you everything you should know about him. Nice of him to give you written evidence to assist in your case, though. Showed up at my job and requested me by name, to serve her and her new boyfriend. She kept saying how great he was in bed. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. Trying to do the things my girlfriend did, like stepping on my shoes while holding onto my shoulders, hugging me, among other things. I came home from high school and my college-age crusher was sitting on the sofa chatting with my family. What the frick? I only went on 2 very platonic dates with him. I was only friendly, but he had way more in mind. He actually asked my parents if he could marry me because I was such a virginal angel, despite repeated texts and calls. Goodbye and good riddance. My God. I used to train with this girl who was crude and blunt, but kind of pretty, and she was a heavy hitter, so she'd spar with the lads as well. No girl wanted to be her spar partner. After having my first go with her as partner, I took some hits and realized she was way too strong to duke it out with, so I began grappling. After a few weeks of this routine, she began to get good at grappling as well. It got weird. She managed to catch my back and just whispered, "If I tap you out, we can do it like dogs later. How about it?" And honest to God, for a second I felt like I was going to become an unspeakable act victim right there and then. I learned later that she had a crush on me but was too embarrassed to do anything normal about it. This guy lived a while away from me, so he learned where I studied from a friend of mine. I didn't tell him for many reasons, and he came one day without saying anything to me. I told him that I had classes that day, but he insisted that I should stay with him. Even though he knew I had a boyfriend, he kissed me and bought me a gift. When I told him I wasn't interested, again, he cried and shouted at me. She went through every picture I had on my MySpace and took pictures of herself in the same pose or scene and then sent them to me. She did that around 20 to 25 times. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Oh, I knew a mentally ill girl who had a crush on me for a while and did various stalkery things, including showing up at my work, changing her phone number 4 times to trick me into answering, and running away from home by hopping on a bus to a city 6 hours away, and then texting me at 3 a.m. that she had changed her mind and asked me to come pick her up and bring her home. At no point did I ever indicate any interest in her whatsoever. On the contrary, I repeatedly told her we'd never be together, but it was just in one ear and out the other. But the crap she pulled with me pales in comparison to another guy she also had a crush on. He was living with a few friends, and their place was a pretty regular hangout for a whole bunch of people. Consequently, they almost never locked doors. She showed up and let herself in one afternoon while they were all at work, and he came home to find her sleeping in his bed. He had to threaten to call the police to get her to leave. Another time, she literally hid behind some bushes with a knife, and when he came walking by, she jumped out and told him she'd self-delete if he didn't hug her. Ugh, my stalker married me. I have such a big crush, I'm going to make sure you can't ever leave me by law. A guy that saw me working in Subway once brought his entire family to meet me. I'd never met the guy. I only know who he was because he was with a group of guys staring at me there a week earlier. They apparently waited over an hour. It started asking about me so much that the workers started keeping me updated on when the guy was there so I could avoid him. Broke into my house and laid down on my couch with me while I was taking a nap. Oh god, this has brought the memories flooding back. So this happened in my first grade in school. First, she once walked up to me randomly and started scratching my back. Like just wildly down my back like a raptor trying to claw something. That's when I began to think she was weird. But then there was the main event. The class was sitting on the ground for story time. A girl named F was wearing a purple dress and white stockings sits down next to me. Then as the teacher begins to read, I feel her bite me hard on my shoulder. I scream out in pain and begin to cry. The teacher looks up confused and I say that F bit me. The girl looks confused and says, "But I like you, that's why I bit you." Needless to say, I didn't like her after that. Funny thing was, I did think she looked cute that day. After the bite, though, I made sure to keep my distance from her. I vaguely noticed a car that was behind me the entire way to work from like the second turn I made out of my house. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I pulled into work and this guy walks over to my car and opens the door and I was like, "What the fu- Oh, hey? What's up?" It was some dude I'd served 2 weeks ago named Bob. So he said something along the lines of, "I bought this book for you." We'd talked about how I like to read and he had recommended this author. So I'm still pretty weirded out that he opened my door and we're the only ones in the parking lot, so I just quickly said, "Thank you," and told him I'd see him inside once my shift started. He then goes on to say, "You didn't see me behind you the whole way? I was waving my arms out the window, but you wouldn't look back. I knew it was you because I remembered your license plate is," and he just read off my number plate. At this point, I'm just calculating in my head how to get the frick out of the situation and internally just freaking. I don't even remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "Oh, no, I didn't see you, but hey, I've really got to go in." Oh, but wait, there's more. He then says, "Oh, well, I live right next to you. Are you in the white apartments or the orange ones? I'm in the golf community right up the street. I drove around to the white ones for a while looking for you so I could give you the book." What the frick? I just told him I really had to go or I'd be late. I went inside and hid in the back for like half an hour until he left and told management and they've put him on the banned list. This was 2 weeks ago and I've been parking my car 3 buildings over and walking to my apartment because he memorized my plate number. Every time I drive, I've been scoping out everyone around me to make sure it's not him. He mentioned leaving to go up north for a few weeks the last day I served him, so I think he's gone, but he'll be back eventually, and I don't really know what else to do other than keep him banned from my work. I met this guy one time, for frick's sake. Sorry this got so long, it's been stressing me out. Nobody had a crush on me, I was the one having said crush. I wrote my phone number on a potato and rolled it to them when I was in 9th grade. I never got a call. Not my brightest moment, to be honest. The old Irish hello. I think you should have tried it out a few more times just to be sure, but then again I guess it's not a winning method for everybody. A classmate of mine who I barely talked to came up to me on Valentine's Day and handed me chocolates and a huge teddy bear with my name sewn into it. A bit weird, but I was appreciative of the gift. However, the worst part is that they handed me a drawing of me leaning on a motorcycle in very revealing clothes that looked kinky as all heck. Keep in mind that my fashion is quite conservative. and they then proceeded to loudly recite a 2-page-long love poem in public whilst I was with my friends. The poem referred to me as his princess, love of his life, among other things. I rejected him and never spoke to him again. You know, when I read that first paragraph, I was thinking, oh, that's too much, but the intent is kind of sweet. Then the second part, and oh no. He cornered me in the hallway when I was on my way to the restroom and proceeded to lean forward, purse his lips, and close his eyes, like I'd been waiting to kiss him my entire life. I proceeded to tell him, "Not today, Daniel," and go about my business. Also, the kid was 5 and I was his teacher. Alright, I should clarify, I'm 5'9", and by cornered I mean ran up to me in the hall, stopped about 2 feet in front of me, blocking my path, and then did the above. Of course, he was 5, so it wasn't really that difficult to get around him. Daniel did this on the regular, actually. His home life wasn't amazing, and I got the feeling he was just starved for attention. A lot of the other teachers, especially the ones that had him before me, didn't think he'd amount to anything since he was always acting up in class. But I like to give all of my kids a chance. Once I gave him a little more one-on-one time that he really needed, he stopped being so disruptive and apparently developed a crush on me. She made me a poster board, scrapbook style, of the moments of our friendship she'd interpreted romantically. Show up at my work at like 4 a.m. and stare into the dark restaurant watching me while I prepped the baking for the day alone. They also advanced the creep and started showing up in my apartment building at weird hours. Told me she had dreams of unaliving me and actually had plans too. It creeped me the frick out, but still I could see she had some serious mental problems and I tried to help her as much as I could. I mockingly called her my special little snowflake while flirting. She had never heard of the label snowflake before. The next day she shows me her new tattoo of a snowflake. They hid in a closet while I did the deed with someone else. Not so bad, but freshman year of college, I had a girl in my class both semesters, and she would not stop staring at me or trying to sit next to me. She'd make comments like, "I like your voice," or uncommon stuff like that, and when I said I had a girlfriend, she called her a hussy. He announced he had a crush on someone in our therapy group while staring directly at me. The entire session was derailed to awkwardly deal with his feelings while I wanted to melt into the floor. We got coffee one time after a group session and he went and did this. I was 19, he was 25, and he knew I had issues with social anxiety. Top 5 worst experiences of my life, hands down. When I was in high school, a painfully shy girl in my art class secretly painted a portrait of me. We were supposed to paint a portrait of a historical figure. We were assigned 6 classes to work on our projects. She shyly showed it to me and said, "This is you." I was stunned, especially since in her eyes I looked like Marty Feldman, the guy who played Igor in the movie Young Frankenstein, only less attractive. Also, one of my ears seemed to have taken flight and was about half an inch away from the side of my head. Since her painting was in my hands, I gave her my portrait of Ben Franklin to her and stammered something and left. Upon reflection, my Ben Franklin probably did bear a passing resemblance to her. I mean, not the glasses, but, you know. They started speaking in my native language when nobody taught him and listening to the same music as I do. I'd never shared my playlist with him. Weirdest case I've ever had is where a girl challenged me to a table tennis match, but she used her flip-flops as dual-wielded pedals. It was 2 a.m. One stood on top of a desk and asked me to kiss him in front of the class. Yeah, that was odd. Next one kissed my knee? I don't know what he was doing. And then there was the one who bullied my little brother and called me bad names all the time because he thought it would get me to like him. No, calling me a fat slag isn't going to get me to be into you, honey. She asked if I wanted to go on a date. I said no. She undressed in the middle of high school and asked, "How about now?" while caressing her body. I said no again and went to my girlfriend, now my wife. Asked me if I had a boyfriend. After I said yes, he didn't like that. Red flags started going off in my head. They made me an axe with my name carved into the handle. It was pretty crude and it was the most bizarre display of affection I've ever received. Anytime they don't take no for an answer, it always weirds me out. I told the guy no several times today while I was trying to work and that I had a boyfriend. Ended up telling him, "Sir, I have a boyfriend and I'm 7 months pregnant." His response? "Oh, I'm very good with kids." What did you do at work that made you realize, Well, I'm getting fired, aren't I? I worked for a small computer company, doing a couple of million a year in sales. One of my tasks was to update price listings and have those changes reflect on our vendors' websites. I put one less zero on one computer model and ended up costing our company $30,000 in about one day. Someone had noticed the error and bought a crap ton of computers. Even though there was a Q&A process to catch these things after me, I knew that I was getting fired. In short, I got fired. I should say that my boss was actually pretty cool about it, but they had to put the blame on someone. He told me I could still use them as a reference and that I could label the position as a short-term contract. I'm a police dispatcher, and one time at work I was working the desk and Toys for Tots workers came in. My boss joked that I should ID them to make sure they weren't thieves. We laughed and the gentleman took the 10 trash bags full of toys and left. Later that night, a man called and asked when he could pick up the toys. After telling him that 2 guys already picked the toys up, he confirmed to me that we had most likely been robbed. He asked if I'd ID'd them and I said no. He spoke to my boss, and my boss then informed me that we would probably be on the news since a police station was robbed, which was ironic, and he flipped out on me. It turns out it was actually an off-duty cop calling to play a prank on me. I worked at an automotive parts manufacturing factory while going to art college, and part of my job was boxing up parts and attaching a tag onto the box with thin wire. But for every box I completed, one every couple of hours, I sculpted a little animal out of the wire with needle-nose pliers. I gave the little sculptures, bears, rabbits, whatever, to random employees, which they left on their workstation. One day, as I was making one of the little sculptures, I looked over my right shoulder to see my supervisor standing directly behind me, just watching me with a clipboard. I paused, looked her dead in the eye, held out the sculpture, and said, "Want a bear?" She fired me on the spot. I'm now an animator at Disney. I hope that before asking your fateful question, you maintained eye contact with your supervisor for at least 5 seconds, with an equal amount of time after your question and before she said, "You're fired." Because that takes this from funny to like NBC comedy script level. Good job on moving up and creating different, more complicated bears for the silver screen. I was a legal secretary. My boss was excited about our new big money case with a new big money client. We'll call them Plaintiff Smith. Boss had 3 attorneys write a 6-page letter to our client outlining exactly how we're going to cream Defendant Jones. The letter included possible counterattacks and legal citations and basically our entire strategy. Meanwhile, I was poring over documents we had received regarding Defendant Jones. I was asked to mail the strategy letter to our client, Plaintiff Smith. No biggie, just put it in an envelope, right? I knew he lived out on Maple Drive, so I pulled his address from some papers on my desk and I mailed that sucker out. Next day, I'm poring over those Defendant Jones documents again, and my blood ran cold. No one had told me that Jones and Smith were next-door neighbors. The address I'd pulled was Jones's. I'd mailed our entire strategy to the opposing side. I immediately called their local post office and used my lunch break to drive there for the next 2 days. People at my office knew my mistake. I think I wasn't fired immediately because there was some chance I might fix it. Everyone avoided me or gave me tight-lipped smiles. Miraculously, the postmaster finally located the letter. The carrier had it in her bag on the 3rd day and brought it back to the post office where I was waiting. I gave the postmaster a $25 gift card and my tearful gratitude. My boss, who'd avoided me, finally broke the silence and said, "I cannot believe you fricking found that letter." It became a crazy story around the office, and I was not fired. I worked at a movie theater in high school. I'm blind in one eye and used to be sensitive about it. I got into an argument with a coworker at the theater, but didn't really think anything of it. Later on, I was going down the hall to get more ice and passed him as he was tearing tickets for customers. He muttered, "Cyclops," as I passed, just loud enough for me to hear. So I immediately turned around and punched him in the face in front of his line of customers. I never saw managers run so fast. Hey, you know those little toys for kids? The little pieces where you shoot off bits of potato? Well, I had the bright idea to shoot off a potato shooter in the parking lot of my company. I fired a few rounds across the road when the maintenance manager came running out, screaming at me. I then realized I was firing a weapon on company property. It doesn't matter that it's potatoes and right guard, it's still a projectile. My fellow supervisors who were watching all disappeared. I went back to my desk to await my manager. All I got was a "I trust this will not happen again" email. I still work for the company and it occasionally gets brought up on my work anniversary. I was working at Cozy, a sandwich, soup and salad place, and had asked to leave early the previous day since my uncle had died. I went back to work and was still in a state of shock and I couldn't check my baggage at the door. I had this horrible lady change her order 4 times during the lunch rush when I had a line out the door. I couldn't take it anymore and told her to either order or get the frick out of my line. My manager heard me. Before he could say anything, I took my apron and hat off, handed it to him and grabbed my stuff and left. I use IDOWM to manage my instant messages while I'm at work. I'm a developer. I was speaking to a project manager at a new job. I'd been there for maybe a month. She was asking me to do some tedious work that was completely unnecessary because they promised it to a client. While frustrated, I tabbed over to my girlfriend's IM to complain about how frustrated I was that they were making us do all this work for basically nothing. Unfortunately, I didn't tab over, and I sent the IM to the project manager. My heart sunk into my stomach. I saw the little icon that showed she was typing and was like, "Oh crap, how do I cover this up before she responds?" I reread the comment and noticed I used a lot of pronouns, so when she responded, she thought I was talking to her about the client. Dear Lord, I thought I'd ruined my awesome new job right after it started. In high school, I worked at an AM radio station in my small town on Sunday mornings. I was the only person there from 6 a.m. to noon. It was mostly reading the weather and playing pre-taped programs. At one point, I play a live broadcast of a Catholic mass going on. During that time, I would crawl into a ball in the break room and doze off, hungover from the night before. One Sunday, I woke up to, "God damn it, Tim, you can't sleep on the job!" And I sit up and see the boss who runs the station standing over me with a frown. "But I wasn't sleeping," I say. Just when I think he might buy it, he says, "You have an alarm clock next to you." Yeah, I brought an alarm clock that I'd set so I didn't oversleep. Hard to explain that one. I thought I was screwed, but somehow he didn't fire me. I worked there for another month and then I left for college. I work in a furniture store, mainly in the warehouse. We sell expensive crap. Like the cheapest lamp you'll find is $100, and that's because it's damaged slightly. We'd received a shipment of a very expensive set, all for a model home that we were staging. I had a china cabinet, still boxed, on our forklift. It was set on a pallet upright on its side, so that was very tall and not very wide. I was bringing it into the warehouse and being super careful. Well, we have a sunken manhole right in front of the warehouse garage floor. The front right wheel of the forklift went right into the dip, and I watched that 350-pound box of wood and glass teeter, rock, and fall flat on the ground. It made a solid thunk, and I knew it was all over. It turned out to not have a sad ending. The lady in charge of damages knew it was an accident and ordered a new one right away, no worries or anything. But when we received the new piece, my manager wouldn't let me near it. Look, I know that you knew about the danger of the manhole and all, but surely it's mostly on your boss for knowing that this problem was an ongoing thing and not taking steps to fix it, because they sure as all heck would have had trouble firing you for that kind of incident. I'm a medical equipment repair technician. One night I was working on an exam light that was hanging from the ceiling in an operating room. I had a bit of it apart and was inspecting the connection between the big light head and the arm that it was suspended from when a clip popped out. The light head dropped to the floor. The arm is spring-loaded and it shot up and shattered the ceiling and 5 or 6 lights, showering the operating table, anesthesia cart, and myself in ceiling tile, plastic, and glass. At first, I was in shock, and what just happened didn't register in my brain. I reached down to pick up the light's head, which is about 3 inches across, and grabbed the arm with my other hand. While trying to put them back together, I realized I'm coating everything in blood. The operations staff came running in and just saw me surrounded by destruction and covered in my own blood. Fortunately, the charge nurse had a sense of humor. I worked at a ticket booth for a water park in high school as a summer job. It was 2010, and so a lot of the people I was working with were adults with families and whatnot, but we were all very close because it's retail, and thus gives you all a common enemy. Anyway, with school starting back up again, I'd put in my 2 weeks' notice. It was a summer job, so I actually had to give my end date on the first day, but we still had to submit a notice. Our company was extremely paranoid about cash. We didn't have any money or cards on us at any time while working, and you couldn't leave your work area at all once you were given money unless you checked your till back in to your supervisor, including every bathroom break. There were cameras all over the booth, and you had to explicitly count any money on the table, separated, so that it would show up on camera. All money was counted randomly throughout your shift twice a day and then again at the end. If you had a variance of over $20, it was considered a Class 3 violation and you were immediately fired. Tickets for the water park were about $60 a person, so one screw-up was essentially all you got in ticketing. Anyway, a woman I was working with, probably about 45, was checking her till in at the same time as me. We talked a lot during downtime. I knew she had 3 kids and was recently divorced. She kept full custody of the kids, but she was essentially a housewife before that. Her husband was very well off, and though with some nice support payments she could keep afloat, she had to take the job to be able to give her kids nice things. She was frustrated at her husband always getting to be the hero who would come in to take them on vacation and didn't have to discipline them and who had the money to buy them new game systems and the clothes that her daughter wanted and whatnot. She was stressed and low on sleep all the time. She was working other jobs too. Anyway, we were tilling out and then I realized she's taking a long time. We put our money through a scanner and there's only one, so I was waiting for her to finish. And I realized she's running everything through multiple times. So I ask what's going on. And I realize her eyes are getting really watery and she whispers that she's off by $36. Now, we really can't make a fuss because while the cameras don't do audio, there are still supervisors around. So I, in a split-second decision, shuffled some paperwork around and slipped the money to her till and told her to just try again. I figured that I was signing off my own death certificate. I got fired on the spot when they checked me out after. They took my gate keys and my ID card, a security officer was called and he escorted me to the break room to get my stuff, and then to my car, where they took my parking pass and drove behind me in their golf cart until I was out of the gates. I wasn't allowed to see anyone or say goodbye, so there was no real closure with me and that woman. She did call me a couple of days later to say thank you and how much it meant and whatnot, and invited me over for dinner with her family. But I was getting ready to go back to school for a couple of days and said no thanks. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Worked at Taco Bell. As a background, people generally consider me very mild-tempered and kind. One night was particularly stressful. It wasn't unusual for us to kind of beat on the touchscreens a bit, but I got mad and I punched one. Mind you, it wasn't a full-blown oh my god punch, it was more like if your buddy made fun of you and you kind of annoyingly punched his shoulder. The screen shattered and then the touchscreen started ringing up hundreds of, coincidentally, fruit punches. The girl working next to me saw the screen shatter and saw my hand bleeding, and looked at me like she thought I'd just started a rampage and was about to go after her. I got fired 3 times that night. Each manager, the store, the district, and regional, fired me, yelled at me, then calmed down, and said that since I'd been a good worker, they'd let me stay if I paid for it. I paid for it. It took a couple of paychecks to replace the touchscreen computer in 2002. I was working for a faith-based radio station. I was supposed to hook up the ISDN for a live broadcast. I shut my eyes, just for a minute, and woke up half an hour into the hour-long broadcast. I got the ISDN to connect, but no audio was playing. I yelled some things like, "Eggplant sucker, goddammit," and then I figured out that the ISDN was hooked up to an A-B switch. The B side was the microphone in front of my face. A couple of old ladies called in after the broadcast saying, "I didn't hear the church for a half hour, and then I heard a man's voice. I think it was you. And then it came on." "Oh, don't worry, ma'am. It won't be a problem going forward, I assure you." I told them I'd switched my medication and passed out. Which is sort of true. That and I was up all night drinking in a faraway town and didn't get any sleep the night before. I left a voicemail for my boss and never went back or worked in a radio again. It just wasn't for me. In short, I said wang sucker on live Christian radio working as an engineer. I quit and I regret nothing. Honestly, the narrator doesn't think they would have fired you, or at least they shouldn't have. Given that you hear about male pastors getting away with mega scandals, what's an accidental exclamation of member sucking between friends? But in all seriousness, I don't think they would have. Depending on the faith, these people can actually be quite forgiving. Threw a staple gun onto the counter. It bounced up and smashed a hole through the monitor at my workstation. I was fired the next day. I was young and I had just got my full-time job at an awesome company. It was a small .com startup, and those of us in customer support, which was about 5 people, had a running gag with the NOC team, which was about 5 people. We called them the NOC bastards, and they called us pool boys, even though I was the first female on the customer support team. On a dare from my supervisor, Reed, not my real manager, I went into the company's alias list and set up nocbastards@company.com to go to the NOC alias, and poolboys@company.com to go to us. The system admin saw the file change and he saw who changed it. Third day of work, I got a stern talking to. I went white as I saw my dream job slipping away. He saw how freaked out I was getting and said, "Calm down, you're not going to get fired for this or anything," before proceeding to go further. He then called in my supervisor and gave him a real stern talking to as well. I ended up becoming friends with that system admin and spent 6 wild years at that company. Oh, my dad has a great one. He was a busboy at a restaurant and it was his first day on the job. The place was packed and he was rushing back with a ton of dishes. Somehow the tray to carry them fell and all of the dishes fell to the floor with a loud crash. Everyone looked over at my dad. My dad saw that there was one lone dish intact, picked it up, held it out at arm's length, then dropped it. It broke. Everyone in the restaurant applauded, and he was then fired. I was once chatting with a higher-up manager about how a lot of people were away on the holidays. She said she might leave early, but I was stuck pulling a couple of extra hours with all of the people out getting their stuff handled. As she was walking away, what I wanted to say was, "Yep, don't want to have anyone working harder at their job than they have to this time of year," or something like that. But what came out of my mouth was, "Yep, don't want to have to make you do your job." She was already around the corner by the time I got that far, so my brain made me stop talking. Then I realized what I'd just said. But it was too late, she was already gone. I heard about it quite a bit from my direct superior later, but nothing came of it. I worked phone technical support in the late 90s. We had an instant messenger program but weren't supposed to use it. Only the managers contacted you on that. So a manager starts a large group conversation on a Friday, then immediately drops off. We continue chatting and having fun for a few minutes, but most of us drop out. About 10 of us kept going. After some time, someone invites a few of our Canadian counterparts to the conversation. We're joking back and forth about who has the better beer, how their weather is sunny, ours was rainy that day, among other things. In the spirit of fun, I post the lyrics to the Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman song from Ren and Stimpy. It seems to be no big deal, conversation dies out within about 15 minutes and we eventually turn it off. I then get a dreaded manager instant message asking my name and group manager. Uh-oh. Within a few minutes, I'm called in by my manager and he takes me to another manager who runs the Canadian group. I was reported as making offensive and harassing comments. My manager asks me very solemnly, "What did you say?" I know I'm so fired at this point, so I just say, I quoted the lyrics to the Ren and Stimpy Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman song. He snorts and almost does a spit take laughing, and then quickly recovers and says, "Okay, don't do it again. Instant messenger is only to be used for work purposes." The other manager just kind of rolls her eyes, tells me the Canadian team doesn't have a sense of humor, and reiterates not doing it again. And that was it. I got away with a slap on the wrist. I just started work in the field as a natural gas technician. I'm normally a model employee at every job I have, but this one started off a little shaky. My first day, while making a K-turn, I backed the company truck into a ditch and bottomed it out. My bosses had to drive out 45 minutes from the office to pull me out. They were obviously annoyed, but for some reason, they decided to keep me aboard. Strike one. The second day at my last house of the day, I managed to lock my keys in the truck. On-duty boss had to leave home, drive all the way to the office and get the spare keys and come unlock my door. Strike two. Third day, no incident. Fourth day, at my first house of the day, While bleeding the gas line inside the house, the gas ignites. Totally burns out the AC unit. This is it. I'm fired. There's no way I keep my job after this. Boss comes to the house, looks at it, looks at me and said, "Man, you screwed up." The next day I was told to stay home. And thus concluded the worst first week on the job I've ever heard of. The best part? Somehow I didn't lose my job, but instead went on to be the best tech they had. I worked there for over a year before moving on to do better things. I worked as a media buyer, and on my third day on the job, my boss asked me to find some information and update the huge spreadsheet he was working on for the client's annual plan. As I was about to update it, he opened the file to finish a few things and asked me to wait. Now, I'm the new girl wanting to show service. I decide to open a copy of the spreadsheet and update it there, so when he finishes, I know where it goes. He finishes, lets me know I can open the file. I just save the one that I've updated on top of his work. I basically made him lose an entire day of work. The year-round spreadsheet was ready, and the one I had was a rough draw. I really thought he was going to throw his monitor on my head. He changed colors and had to leave the office in order not to curse me out. I apologized the next day, and so did he, and we agreed to always save versions from that day forward. Firefighters. What ways have you seen idiots literally make their lives go up in flames? In the city of Colorado Springs, the local news did a fluff piece about candle safety near Christmas. After they were done filming, the owner of the store that they were filming in took the crew out to breakfast. She didn't put out the candles and burned several shops to the ground. The film crew was there to film her breakdown when they realized what had caused the fire. I worked for a restoration company. A family cut a small tree down and tried to stuff it up their fireplace to burn it. The flute was so crammed with leaves that smoke started to fill the living room. They tried to pull the tree out, and that's when it really caught fire. They tried to pull it out of the house, and they got as far as the front door. All of them had second and third degree burns on their hands and arms, and the fire destroyed the front room and entryway of their house. The insurance company asked us if we thought it was a case of fraud, and we told them, "No, these people are just really stupid." A fairly common one, but the response was interesting. Early February, Western Pennsylvania. A guy's pipes freeze on the coldest day of the year, -8 degrees Fahrenheit. He tries to thaw them out with a propane torch, and sets the wall on fire, tries to put the fire out, and fails. Finally calls 911. Fire chief is half a block away and is on scene in under a minute. The basement is fully involved, main floor catching. The first engine arrives in under 5 minutes. Doors are blocked by fire, exterior attack only. I was on the attack line, spraying water into the second floor window. After 40 minutes, another firefighter comes to relieve me, but since I'd been getting back spray, I was frozen to the ground. He has to pull me loose. 2 hours later, we've knocked it down. The insurance adjuster shows up. The assistant chief explains what started the fire. The adjuster replies, "Yeah, we know. It's okay. We insure for stupid." Nobody got hurt, by the way. Family got a much nicer house out of the deal as well. A teenager was charcoal grilling in the attached garage during the winter. When he was done, he decided the best place to dispose of the hot coals was into a cardboard box in front of the corner of the garage closest to the house. Yeah, it went about as well as you can imagine. I don't understand what they mean by that last sentence. Paper and its relatives are famously fireproof. That's why we make all of our important documents out of it, surely. And it's also why the narrator has a trail of single-ply toilet paper circled around his fireplace and leading into the bedroom of his firstborn child. My dad was a firefighter. He once went to a house fire that was started by the old lady who lived there. She liked to burn candles, but didn't like the wax buildup that would form in the cavity, so she would soak up the liquid wax with a napkin. She was doing this when she accidentally brushed a wax-soaked napkin up against the flame. She panicked and threw the napkin into the trash, where all the other wax napkins were. As the trash can exploded into flames, she fled the house, but not before she went to her oxygen tanks and flooded the house with pure oxygen because she thought that it would smother the fire. Not a house fire, but really good. Late 1980s. Guy was driving an old beat-up Lincoln. He turned a corner to go up a steep hill, but the road department had recently ground the asphalt down in preparation to repave. A storm sewer manhole cover was sticking up about 4 inches. As he went over it and up the hill, the rear of his car dragged due to the pavement height difference, and the manhole ripped open his fuel tank and sparked off the gas. He described it as, "I heard a scraping sound, looked in the mirror, and there was a trail of fire chasing me up the hill like I was the roadrunner." He pulled into a gravel parking lot and tried to kick a brake in the trail before the fire got there, but it jumped the gap and hit the car. By the time we got there, it was up in flames. He actually thought it was kind of funny. The only real loss was his wife's purse with her license and credit cards. The car was insured and they got a nice payout for it. I am a firefighter, but this wasn't in my district. A guy was attempting to forge a sword in a burning barrel in an alley, based on something he'd watched on the History Channel. The embers from the, quote, forge lit up the building he lived in and destroyed 3 multi-story family residential buildings. This happened in the past fall. A family had a fairy house that was outside, right next to their wooden-sided house. The fairy house was made out of an old tree and had a bunch of decorations in it, including incense candles. One evening, they decided that they'd light the candles for the fairy, which then caught the tree on fire, which then extended into the house. Since it started on the outside, it ran up the side of the house first and got into the attic and second floor. The family was home, but in the first floor while this was happening. It wasn't until someone driving on the road saw the smoke and went to alert the family that they realized. Luckily, we were able to save the structure. There was a bit of damage to the roof, attic, and second floor, but the homeowners are rebuilding those areas now. In college, a girl in the dorms was making popcorn, which, not sure, but somehow caught fire in the microwave. She didn't want to get into trouble for it, so she grabbed the flaming bag of popcorn and threw it into the nearby trash can, then proceeded to cover the fire with paper towels to, quote, smother it. She actually thought it would work. It did not work. I came back exhausted after work to find the dorm building surrounded by fire trucks. Based on the stories of relatives, the answer is by allowing 10 years worth of dryer lint to accumulate inside the machine until it just bursts into flames. This was not an isolated case. Forgetting to close the bottom of your grill and then going overboard with lighter fluid. Oh yeah, a friend of mine in the 5th grade caught himself on fire with lighter fluid when the charcoal wasn't really starting. They used to sell extension arms that you could hook the lighter fluid can to, and he used one of those. But the fire ran up the dripping fluid into the can. No problem, he just walked over and set it down and released the holder, at which point the can tipped over. It was only about a quarter full, so only a little spilled out, but he went to tip it back up when it exploded right when his head was above it, and the burning lighter fluid covered his head. He was pretty smart for an 11-year-old. He remembered where the fire extinguisher was, ran over, pulled the pin, sprayed himself, but he still had bad burns all over his face and head. College students really are something else, man. My school is a nursing and engineering school full of the people that will be staffing hospitals and designing the technology of tomorrow. I cannot tell you how many times I was woken in the middle of the night because one of these beacons of the future took way too much green herb and put a burrito in the microwave with the foil still on it. I mean, we had numerous people forget to add water to the instant noodle cup, but leaving the foil wrap on something is probably way worse. Oh, that awkward period between leaving high school and becoming real adults with jobs. We learn a lot of important lessons during our years in college, like what not to do in the kitchen, so that when you inevitably move into your own flat, you don't burn it down around you. Not everyone learns it early enough, I guess. It was in my local paper. It turned out to be my friend's older brother. He tried to smoke out bees in the loft and set fire to the insulation in there, and burnt the whole house down. My father was a Boston firefighter for more than 30 years. One of his more memorable stories was a foreign family who'd ripped up their cast iron bathtub and built an open flame underneath it. They used the tub as a giant oil fryer. Naturally, this didn't work out very well and the house caught fire. To add to the insanity even more, the family absolutely refused to let my dad and his co-workers in without taking their boots off, which of course they couldn't agree to. Just crazy. I was a chef before I was on a volunteer fire department for a bit, and this was at a restaurant down the street from my old one. Cooks at this restaurant forgot to plug the drain in the deep fryer. So what happened was they put oil in a fryer which drained immediately right before lunch, turned on said fryer, and that's when the coils caught fire. So not only did they spill 5 gallons of oil, burn a fryer, fill a restaurant with smoke, and kill the service day, this was the second time it had happened. My uncle is a firefighter, and the answer is Christmas trees. If they dry out, they become a ticking time bomb. He used to do an annual demonstration where he'd let a Christmas tree dry out for a few months, and then he'd take it outside and ignite it. The flames would shoot 40 feet in the air and the tree would be gone in a few seconds. It was mightily impressive to behold, and I'm sticking with artificial trees. Firefighter here. One extremely cold night, the temperature was -11, with wind chills in the -40s. This guy tries starting a fire in his fireplace and couldn't get it started. He decides to use gasoline. He dumps half a gallon on the firewood stacked by the door and the other half onto the wood in the fireplace. As he attempted to light the fire, he couldn't get the lighter to work. Now the vapors are really starting to build up. He then goes to the kitchen, which adjoins the room with the fireplace, to use the stove to light some newspaper. As soon as he turned the knob on the stove, the igniter lit the gasoline vapors. The living room was instantly on fire. The vapors singed all his hair and he got first-degree burns on his hands and face. We, on the other hand, spent the next few hours in the extreme cold. Flash ahead 3 hours, now the firewood outside has somehow ignited and we have to go back. The second fire had some time to really grow. In the middle of the night, everyone was in bed with no one around. The longest, coldest night of all my life, all because some fool decided to use gasoline to start a fire indoors. I set my parents' bathroom on fire while getting up from the toilet. My mum used to leave potpourri simmering in a small bowl on the back of the toilet with a candle to heat and stew it just below. As I was getting up, I somehow knocked the apparatus off the back of the commode. We had carpet floors in that bathroom, and that section of the floor caught pretty quickly. The fire then found a seam in the wallpaper and ignited the glue fairly easily as well. As the flames rose, it caught the roll of toilet paper on the way up the wall, which really accelerated things. All of this took less than 30 seconds, and I remember being somewhat mesmerized at the path the flames traveled. I also remembered that I'd flushed the toilet before realizing what had happened. I somehow thought to grab the toilet bowl brush, shove it into the commode to get it wet, and then beat out the flames. The aftermath was surprisingly minimal. The small section of carpet was destroyed, but my parents replaced the carpet everywhere a few years later. The wallpaper wiped clean with some hot water and a rag, and thankfully there was only a little permanent smoke damage on the ceiling, which has seemed to fade over time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Mid-80s, near the beginning of my career. A young lady finished putting flea spray on her pupper when she noticed a tick embedded in its flank. You ever hear of the tick removal technique in which you blow out a match and touch the hot tip to the tick, thereby causing it to back out of the dog? Yeah, the dog caught fire. The little fellow ran under the bed, which also caught fire. The lady grabbed the pup with the flea spray still on her hands, and they too caught fire. Long story short, the house was a mess, but both the lady and the dog fortunately survived with moderate burns. There was also the lady who tried to sanitize her panties in the microwave, but thankfully I was off that day. Family friend decided to make major renovations on their home with no background in construction or carpentry. They also didn't bring a professional to ensure that their renovations were up to fire code. Lo and behold, an exposed wire sparked a fire in the middle of the night and burned down their entire home. They have 3 kids and are very fortunate they were all able to escape the fire without any injuries. To make matters even worse, they had no house insurance. Extreme libertarians that didn't believe in insurance or debt. So they ended up having to rely on a GoFundMe fundraiser, set up by a relative, to recover financially. Last I heard, they were still living in a hotel, trying to figure out their next plan of action. The story alone reaffirms my belief that some things are better left to the professionals. Even if you're trying to cut costs, it might be best to pay a little extra to have someone with experience do something for you instead. This avoids terrible situations like this. See, there are a lot of things the narrator will slog through and do a terrible job at in order to save money. Things involving high voltage are not on that very long list. The same with flammable gases. Yay, my $50,000 in materials house went up in flames within 5 minutes of me turning the lights on. That would be the title of my newsletter that week. This one happened in my building. In India, generally you have a small praying place in your house, like a little version of a temple, a shrine. You light a lamp every day and pray there. In this particular case, the family decided to keep this thing on a fricking refrigerator. The lamp fell behind the fridge due to wind from the window adjacent to it. The condenser caught fire and literally exploded. The whole floor was then on fire. Luckily, no one was home. It was a really dumb decision to keep a temple on a fricking fridge. This one happened in a certain mall here in Monterrey, Mexico. We have a Freaky Plaza, a little mall where all the geeks, gamers, and otakus go to, and on the second floor someone was smoking while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And since he didn't want to throw his ashes on the floor and the trash can was far away from him, he decided to make a paper ashtray. Yeah, that didn't work out well, especially when 3 of his friends decided to use it as well. So here in Argentina we have El Cordero a la Cruz, basically cooking a whole lamb with an open fire. And well, it just so happens that pines are really flammable. And if you make an unprotected fire in a floor covered in pine leaves near a blooming pine, well… Ooh, I have 2. The first is that once my neighbor stole 15 propane tanks and decided to make a DIY blowtorch. By neighbor, I mean he lived below us. We were giving him our basement. He almost lit the house on fire, but then he tripped on something and fell over. The next morning we looked and saw it had burned a little bit, but not much. He was also very drunk that day. And the second was that once we lived in a basement suite, and the people who lived above us were making toast at 2 a.m., and they used a fork to get it out, but the fork hit something, so the toaster caught fire, and my mum tried to wake me up. But I just pulled my blanket over my head and said, "I just want to sleep a little more." And then my mum said the house could burn down, and I was the first one out of my house. My neighbors forgot they had ferrets inside. We grabbed our dog, but they didn't grab their ferrets. The fire department came, but my neighbors could have put out the fire if they unplugged the toaster and put baking soda on it. Settle in, folks. Mr. Homeowner was attempting to deep fry tater tots in a saucepan of oil on a gas stove. The oil frothed up when the frozen tots hit the surface, igniting the whole thing. Mr. Homeowner then proceeded to try and grab the pan by the handle and swing it over the sink. I imagine it was like a Vietnam-era napalm run. Well, he managed to spread the fire across the linoleum floor and in a panic let go of the pan, launching it, the remaining burning oil, and tots into the laundry basket, which was full of freshly dried clothes. In the ensuing panic, Mr. Homeowner thought he could try to get the flaming laundry basket out to the back porch. Well, he only managed to knock the flaming basket off the table, and it tumbled off the table and straight down into the basement, leaving a nice trail of burning oil-soaked towels all the way down. Now, Mr. Homeowner decides to make egress out of the back kitchen door, down the stairs into the backyard. He slightly missed the stairs, hit his bare right foot on one of the railing posts, breaking a couple of toes, and then flew forward off the staircase, managing to impale himself onto a bit of rebar that was protruding from a cement block that they were using as a sort of barrier on the edge of the cement patio. And there he stayed, clad only in boxer shorts. He managed to nick his liver pretty badly, but somehow survived. Did I mention he had burned his legs up pretty badly as well? So, the smells and smoke and the screams of Mr. Homeowner at finding himself struck through with a piece of rusty iron alerted Big Mama, Mr. Homeowner's girlfriend, and their punk teen kids number 1 and 2 upstairs. They realize something's afoot. As far as we can tell, Big Mama went looking for the kids or the dogs, both the dogs had already made it out, over the raging laundry and oil combo fire 1 flight below. She found Mr. Homeowner on the back patio, bleeding and turning grey, screaming and trying to get off the piece of metal. The punk teen kids, with the dogs, climbed out of a side bedroom window to the side porch roof. The older punk teen kid, about 16 years old, managed to tumble off. He didn't land well. I think he ended up breaking his arm pretty badly. The dogs and the younger ones got pulled off that roof by the neighbors. Big Mama apparently had a significant cardiac event and fell over. She happened to do so in the junk room, a sort of Collier Brothers-style room filled shoulder-high with stacked boxes of junk. By the time we got there, it was just a charred, soaked mess of black slop about waist deep. We had to dig Mama out of it. That was wretched. All of this attracted the attention of the many foreign laborers who were living in the boarding house next door. They helped the best they could, but also became a very raucous audience. A few of them were bomberos voluntarios back in Guatemala, and having an entire company of mostly non-English speaking volleys show up intent on going to work made things very interesting. Two of these guys saved Mr. Homeowner's life though. I have never, in my 27 years of doing this, arrived on a scene of such screaming and chaos. Thank you, dear author, for a very well-written and illustrative description of this absolutely chaotic, raging inferno and many resulting medical episodes that resulted from it. And all because my man wanted some tater tots. In the apartment building I stayed in, I had a pretty good fire. A guy threw a lit cigarette in a coffee can full of butts. It was on the far side of the building from us, so my upstairs neighbor and I got to stay. Everyone else had to move. We were dealing with water leaks for almost a year after that. It took them so long to sort out insurance stuff and to make repairs. They finally put on a new roof a few weeks before we moved. Someone tried to make a gummy bear lamp like in iCarly to test if it's really going to burn, and then his house was on fire. A news article I read, one guy had a fishbowl in his garden shed. The sunlight was focused through the bowl from his kitchen window. Whoomph. My partner's a firefighter. He said the dumbest one was where a man tried to barbecue in his basement. This gentleman's reasoning? I don't want to go outside and risk exposure to the coronavirus. It would be safer to do it here in the basement. Not a firefighter, but I read a story about a woman that started a fire because her firefighter friends were bored. Mine was stupid, but reasonable. There was a spider. By far the dumbest is people smoking while on medical oxygen, like the tanks are coated in labels about how inflammable it is. I was living in a big old single-family home that had been converted into 6 apartments. Because it was a house, it had a shingle roof. The owner hired one of those unlicensed, uninsured type outfits to work on the roof. The kind you find hanging out at Home Depot in the morning looking for jobs. Anyways, long story short, the guy was on the roof, smoking, and somehow caught it on fire. Rather than dialing 911, he ran down 3 flights of fire escape, got the garden hose, ran it back up, and once he got to the top, he realized he'd never turned the hose on. So he ran back down, turned it on, and ran back up. Apparently by that time it was out of control, so he headed off. One of the neighbors finally called 911, but by then it was on full blaze, destroyed the top 2 floors and most of the first floor. Moral of the story is, just call the professionals. What movie could you turn around and say that the good guy was really a complete butthole in? Tom and Jerry. Tom is just a poor house cat trying to fight off the food-stealing, property-destroying, and teasing little vermin that is Jerry. I love Rent, but seriously, it's about a bunch of teenagers who refuse to pay their rent because their friend and landlord Benny told them a while ago that they could live there rent-free, and now he's asking for them to contribute a bit. So they screw with Benny's business dealings and kill his dog. And then he pays for Mimi to go to rehab? He's definitely the good guy in the movie if anyone is. Benny buys a building, lets his friends live in it for free, comes up with a business plan that would allow them to build a studio that would let them work on their craft. They would still be living rent-free by building condos over the studio and using the rent from the condos to help keep the studio open. The only thing I can see wrong with him is that he's a sucker who keeps allowing people around him to take advantage of his generosity. Mark is a failed screenwriter who villainizes the people he should be grateful to. He ignores his own parents on Christmas because they irritate him, despite them obviously caring a lot for him and missing him. And then he launches an attack on the one person who's trying to help him succeed by supporting him. Roger is a former smack addict who fancies himself a tortured artist, but all he does is sit on his butt in the apartment feeling sorry for himself. Mimi is a 19-year-old smack-addicted exotic dancer who pushes substances on others and has a YOLO philosophy on life. Tom Collins is a bright, intelligent young man who could have had a great future ahead of him if he hadn't vandalized expensive electrical equipment at MIT and got himself fired. So his solution is to mooch off an old acquaintance and drink Stoli while rewiring ATMs. Maureen is a narcissistic, untalented performing arts artist with no morals or sense of loyalty. She's unfaithful, manipulative, and only cares about herself. Angel is a street drummer who appears sweet and kind to all those around him, and yet has no qualms about killing an AITA he had no beef with, or breaking and entering. Joanne falls into the category of sucker. She's an uptight Ivy League graduate who finds herself in over her head when she meets someone who tries to teach her to let her hair down. The music in Rent is brilliant. The storyline is awful. I know some big musical fans who I feel like I can never bring up this new dark knowledge that I now possess to. I guess I'll just carry it with me to my grave. Such is the life. It's yours and my burden to bear, listeners. Peter Pan, as it is clearly said that Peter cut off Hook's hand for no reason. And the Lost Boys? Wendy and her brothers? They're just little kids who were taken from their rooms in the middle of the night to go live with a strange little boy in the middle of nowhere. And in the books, Peter kills the boys once they enter puberty. I think it makes a point to say that he's the only one with a weapon, his knife. The boys who escape him become the pirates and they're devoted to killing Peter Pan so he doesn't kill any more boys. I also think they're trapped on the island, not sure about that though. I read the novel when I was 8. Aladdin. He lies the entire time to get Jasmine, and it works. Serendipity. Both the lead male and female were narcissistic buttholes who crapped all over their devoted significant others. The Leprechaun movies. The guy would happily mind his own business if people would just stay the heck off his gold. Squidward minds his own business. He just wants to paint his art and play the clarinet. In fact, you can type Squidward into Google Images, and you basically just get a load of facial expressions of someone being persecuted by his neighbors. He is a bit pretentious, though. The Girl in the Notebook. She cheated on her fiancé and then left him. Animal House is a movie about a college dean simply trying to retain order and safety amongst the Greek system, and the fraternity responds by doing the deed with the dean's wife and mayor's underage daughter. A fraternity member poses as the boyfriend of a deceased sorority member to get a date, and the fraternity eventually destroys the town's parade. Jaws. They're hunting a shark because they're mad that it kills people in the ocean. Heavyweights. A bunch of morbidly obese children imprison the camp's owner for encouraging them to better themselves. Dead Snow. The zombies just wanted their stuff back from those D-bag medical students. Fred from Scooby-Doo. There are a variety of reasons why he's always the biggest villain in the series and movies, but probably the most pertinent is his exploitation of Shaggy and Scooby. Shaggy and Scooby are petrified of ghosts, but are always the pair that take the most risks in being human bait in one of Fred or Velma's master plans. Why? Scooby snacks. Fred realizes the two are addicted to Scooby snacks. Heck, Fred himself probably spikes them with white snow or something, so he abuses his monopoly over them to exploit Shaggy and Scooby's addiction. So addicted are the pair that they forgo all of their fears of ghosts just to get a hit. So when Fred says, "Hey guys, why don't you volunteer?" he already knows the answer will be a zombified yes if he promises Scooby snacks or intoxicates the pair on Scooby snacks beforehand. It's similar to promising smack to an addict, provided they do something they're usually scared of. Does the addict really have a choice? No. Fred got Scooby and Shaggy addicted to substances so they'd be more prone to taking risks. The Wizard of Oz. I'm not suggesting Dorothy was evil, but she killed a woman and just accepted that what she'd done was okay because a bunch of little people she'd never met told her the woman was wicked. Seriously, if someone dropped a house on my sister and then proceeded to take her clothing, put the clothing on and then prance off down the road while singing, I'd send winged monkeys after them too. One that's really annoyed me since I've seen it? Happy Feet. The moral of the entire story is, if nature wants to save itself from mankind, it needs to learn how to entertain us better. Seriously, nature isn't entertaining enough for mankind to care, is what Happy Feet's writers seem to say. The Little Mermaid. Seriously, it's a spoiled 16-year-old mermaid who throws a huge fit and becomes obsessed with a complete stranger. Then she makes a deal with the Sea Witch so that she can have legs and run off to marry the complete stranger. Okay, maybe this doesn't necessarily make her a bad person, But what the frick kind of lifestyle is Disney trying to portray as a good way to live? I read an incredibly detailed essay about Michael Bay's Transformers films on the Something Awful forums, if I recall correctly, that said, among other things, Optimus Prime was the series' main villain and Megatron was, if not the hero, then far more traditionally heroic. From what I remember, if you compare Optimus's narration throughout the 3 movies and what is revealed of the war on Cybertron through dialogue, it becomes very clear that Optimus is an unreliable narrator and the Autobots were an outsider group who, having conclusively lost the war, were willing to end their own species. Destroying the Allspark would cut off all possibility of continuing the species after all, as well as revenge killings. All of the Decepticons they and the military hunted down in the second movie who weren't shown as being aggressive. Megatron's character arc has him, after winning the first war, traveling to Earth to retrieve the Allspark so his race can continue, then getting frozen by pure chance, getting discovered, studied, and having his body violated to make our technology, finally escaping with the help of a few loyal friends, only to discover that his old enemies are in league with the creatures who've been dissecting him for the last century. Having one of the creatures, a particularly annoying one, use the object he's been striving for to kill him, and then after getting resurrected, trying to keep his people together while being usurped twice, and all the while being hunted by Optimus and those monstrous, bloodthirsty humans. Not that this wasn't a particularly fun perspective and all, but I'm pretty sure that the guy who wrote the theory put more thought into Michael Bay's Transformers than Michael Bay ever did. And I'm not even a Michael Bay hater, I love me a good pew-pew CGI robots movie. But yeah, there was no way he was thinking on this level. Let's not beat around the bush. In Toy Story 1, Woody is a massive, selfish jerk who's jealous of Buzz and tries to kill him. He doesn't try to kill him, his intention was to knock him behind the desk so that Woody would be taken to Pizza Planet instead. The plan went awry when Buzz dodged. The dentist on Finding Nemo. They make him out to be some kind of kidnapper, but he was just trying to find a nice present for his special needs niece. Mate, you can't just call Australian kids special need kids. Mrs. Doubtfire. Robin Williams is a creepy dad stalking his old family. The Harry Potter series. Dumbledore. He's manipulative and out for the greater good, even if it means setting a child up to face death. Even if Harry didn't die, he thought he would. Not to mention his association with Grindelwald, and the fact that he knew so much information and could have saved a lot of time if he'd just told Harry to begin with. But of course, J.K. Rowling did a brilliant job with the series, and I know that if Dumbledore did say anything, the books and movies would not have been as epic as they were. And I know full well that this isn't a popular opinion. I know that he had to be that way to protect the wizarding world. I just answered the question when I noticed that no one else had mentioned Dumbledore yet. I have read Methods of Rationality. Beauty and the Beast. A man tries to save his love from a crazy beast who almost killed her father and practically enslaved her. I mean, this take would work if Gaston wasn't such an insufferable jerk. Hamlet. He murders his uncle based on the testimony of a fricking ghost. Come on, son. That's the point of his wishy-washiness the whole play. The real evidence, while mostly circumstantial, but enough for Hamlet, was his uncle flinching and leaving during the play within a play. Law-abiding citizen. Starship Troopers. It's all government propaganda to make themselves seem superior. The bugs didn't launch AmITheA, they just became a media scapegoat for the meteor strike on Buenos Aires. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Pirates of the Caribbean. Jack was a pirate, but they made the English the bad guys for persecuting him. I know that's the point of the story, but it still bothered me as a child. I think the reason Jack is considered heroic is because they never necessarily showed him doing piratey things throughout all 4 movies. We never see him steal from or kill the innocents, as pirates were prone to doing. We just see a mischievous guy who goes on grand adventures and treasure hunts. Also, I would say that the English are evil in the same way Hank from Breaking Bad is evil. Which is to say they aren't, they're just lawful. And since the heroes go up against the law, that puts them at odds. Avatar. The humans were industrious and ambitious, and the aliens were lazy. Assuming Jared Diamond is correct, the Na'vi have everything going for them. Superior crops, massive horses, and fricking birds, a global neurological database, they should have become a Type 2 civilization by the time we got to Pandora, but they're too fricking lazy. Frick them, they can die. AmITheA, the movie where a crippled human betrays his race for a local girl and escapes all the repercussions for it. Furthermore, not only does he get away with it, he's rewarded for his treason with a new body and acceptance into an alien culture. Proof that if you believe hard enough and betray everything you and everyone around you has worked for, you'll be richly rewarded. Until the humans slam a quintillion-kilogram asteroid traveling at 0.3 C into the planet in order to mine the remnants in space. I don't think the narrator can agree with the assessment that the aliens are the bad guys just for living more or less in harmony with nature or becoming, a super civilization that colonizes everyone else. You can't call them lazy when they live and die swinging through the trees and navigating perilous carnivores, whilst maintaining an egalitarian society that goes toe-to-toe with the industrial military might of Earth. That's a bad take, people. Imagine that you are from Cuba. You grew up shunned and ignored by the USA. In fact, the USA is a distant opponent that you don't know a lot about. You do know that they have a garrison on Cuba, and you know that they keep a military presence here that makes you uneasy. Let's just say that one day, soldiers from that garrison kill your only family members. You're so mad that you join a multinational freedom fighter force that plots to destroy the USA. Just after you join, escaping their military and fleeing your country, you learn that the USA has invaded and effectively destroyed the government of the nation you were headed towards, Panama. You are outraged and vow revenge. Through a series of misadventures, you find your boat taken captive on board an aircraft carrier, the Nimitz, from the USA. You manage to escape, liberating a political prisoner, but your best friend dies in the process. Not only do you hate the USA, you hate the symbol of American oppression, the Nimitz. You flee to Grenada, but learn that the Nimitz is on the way, leading to a plan to topple that country as well. Desperately, you go out in speedboats to attach a bomb to the nuclear reactor. Almost all your fellow freedom fighters die in the attempt, but against all odds, you succeed. The bomb goes off and thousands die. You'll be hailed as a hero by your fellow freedom fighters, but in the USA, you'll be reviled as a villain of the worst sort and a murderer on a massive scale. They'll devote all of their resources to killing you and your peers. From their perspective, you are the bad guy. So what movie am I talking about? Star Wars. Cuba is Tatooine, the USA is the Empire, the Freedom Fighters are the Rebellion, Panama is Alderaan, Grenada is a moon of Yavin, Nimitz is the Death Star. It's all about perspective. National Treasure. Nicolas Cage was the bad guy, and at worst, Sean Bean was misunderstood. Think back to the very beginning of the movie. Sean Bean and Nick Cage are both treasure hunting together. They've been a good team together. They've been working together well. Heck, Sean Bean has been funding the entire operation. Then they finally find the clue that tells them that the map is on the back of the Declaration of Independence. Sean Bean suggests that they borrow the map. Nicolas Cage suddenly and strangely says no. "I'm not going to let you steal the Declaration of Independence," and essentially implies that he would stop Sean Bean from getting the declaration. Think about this for a minute. These two are friends. They've been working together for years. And suddenly, when they're so close, Nick Cage goes, "Sorry, I'm not going to let you get the treasure." And then, to top it all off, Nick Cage steals the Declaration of Independence himself. He justifies it by saying that to stop Sean Bean from stealing the declaration, he, Cage, must steal it first. What? That's like if I was working in a bank robbery group and then decided that to prevent the bank robbery from happening, I should rob the bank first and keep the money for myself. It makes no sense and is a clear betrayal. Why didn't Cage just work with Sean Bean in the first place, and the two could have shared the treasure together like they'd planned? Finally, at the end of the movie, Nick Cage basically frames Sean Bean for the theft of the declaration. Remember, Nick Cage stole the declaration. The FBI agent specifically said that someone has to go to jail. Nick was caught and is on film with the Declaration of Independence. How did he not go to jail? Instead, Sean Bean goes, for doing what? He never stole the Declaration of Independence. Yeah, he might have done some other stuff like kidnapping, violence, etc., but those were justified because he had been betrayed by Cage. And there are lots of other little details throughout the movie showing Nick Cage's trickery and deception against Sean Bean. From the very beginning, it's made out like he used Sean Bean and his vast resources just to find the clue in that boat. And even when Sean Bean broke Nick Cage out of police custody, remember, Sean Bean was helping Nick Cage out here, Nick Cage was still pulling little tricks, hiding the truth, and not telling Sean Bean everything he knew, which they had made an agreement to do. Seriously, rewatch this movie, look at it very closely, and tell me how Sean Bean is the bad guy here. The entire movie, Nick Cage is pulling the tricks, hiding the ball, and betraying Sean Bean, who was his friend at the beginning of the movie. And just answer this very simple question. Nicolas Cage stole the Declaration of Independence. So why didn't he go to jail? In short, Sean Bean wasn't the bad guy in National Treasure, and Nick Cage was because he betrayed Sean Bean at the very beginning of the movie and essentially framed him as stealing the Declaration of Independence. Did you forget how the movie begins with betrayal and Sean trying to kill Nick? Or how Nick tries to go to the authorities first to warn them that someone will try to steal the Declaration, but they all ignore him due to his family's history? Or how, at the end, Sean leaves Nick and the crew in a pit, seemingly to starve to death? You're kind of reaching here, my friend. Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He skipped school, convinced his girlfriend to skip school, dragged his sick friend out of bed, and made his friend steal his father's incredibly expensive car. Ed Rooney was a hard-working educator. Most faculty in his position would have sighed, rolled their eyes, and shrugged Ferris's chronic absenteeism off. But Dean Rooney went above and beyond the call of duty, actually going out to track Ferris down and get his life back on track. And I know the actor who played Rooney was an awful man, you can all stop mentioning it. And I know that the character made it personal and crossed a bunch of lines, but that doesn't change the fact that A, he was doing his job, and B, Ferris was a self-entitled jerk and breaking the law left and right. Yeah, I think that everyone in the audience was well aware that Bueller isn't meant to be a saint, he's just a little craphead who's looking for a good time and takes us along with him. But I guess me pointing it out doesn't make it contrary to the point of this video. However, it does make me laugh thinking about people coming out of this movie white-fisted with rage about how awful this boy was for playing hooky from school. It always bothered me about how Rose, upon surviving the Titanic, went and got married and lived a happy life. The whole shebang. Once she dies, however, is when crap hits the fan. Does she go see her loving husband who spent his life with her? No, she goes with a dude she had a little fling on a boat with. Crap pisses me right off. Justin Bieber, Never Say Never. 500 Days of Summer. Tom. I'm not sure that Summer could be the good guy or Tom could be the bad guy, just that they're guys. I think that's what the movie does so well. It paints them off as complex people living in shades of grey. Tom does idealize her, but I don't think that makes him bad. I think everyone has idealized a significant other or a crush at some point, and Summer told him that she wasn't looking for something serious, so I can't blame her for that. And yet, they were a couple and she refused to acknowledge that fact. Bottom line is that both are exceedingly well-written characters. The all-time D-bag good guy in a movie was Santa Claus in the classic stop-motion Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. What a narcissistic, self-serving, porcine SOB. He has zero empathy for anyone else's problems and has the gall to tell Rudolph's dad that his son had better outgrow the red nose if he wants to be on the sleigh team someday. It's pretty ironic that a human manatee in a red suit is ostracizing someone else based off their appearance. By the way, I'm a big boy, so I've got a bit of slack when it comes to the fat jokes. Rudolph's dad is no hero either. Frickin' suck-up. His reindeer lips are locked firmly around old Kris Kringle's candy cane. He's totally on board in shaming his son for daring to look different. And let's not forget how he treated the elves after they spent so much time and energy groveling before him, celebrating his bowl full of jelly butt by singing his praises. It was very clear that Santa gave exactly zero fricks about the elves and their hosannas. I guess every slave owner has the same opinion. It's too bad they made the man in red look like such a squirming bag of Johnsons. Really casts a pall on my Christmas memories, considering how much I cherished that show when I grew up. Didn't really figure out how messed up it was until I hadn't seen it in years and watched it as an adult. In short, Santa is a jiggling bag of crap who treats Rudolph and the elves like they were toenail dirt. What are the dumbest questions you've had to field out of nowhere? A few months ago, a TSA officer asked me about the intention of your eyeglasses. I told him, so that I can see, and went on my way. My friend was stopped by a TSA agent after arriving at LAX and taken into a separate room for questioning. He has a lazy eye and looks like he's on something pretty much all of the time. Another agent walked up to his dad and asked in a really aggressive voice, "Is there anything you don't know about your son that we should know about?" A TSA agent in Vermont was checking out my hunting shotty before sending it through to be loaded onto the plane. He comes up to me after a few minutes and asks, "This weapon is tested positive for explosive residue." I said, "Like gunpowder?" TSA dude said, "Oh," and hangs his head and walks away. My 5-year-old is mixed ethnicity, doesn't obviously look like me to people not used to seeing mixed kids, and doesn't speak English. So when I took him to the US via San Francisco last time by myself, I was quite seriously interrogated until I finally told them, "It's too bad you don't have any agents who speak Japanese, or you could just ask my son." Of course, I said this while pointing at an agent a few meters away whose name tag read Maruyama. They called her over, and in about 5 seconds it was cleared up. "Hi little boy, what's your name?" Then confirmed with passport, "And who's this?" "Okay, you and your dad have a nice trip." I have a cochlear implant, with a magnet embedded in my skull to hold the device in place. I never go through the metal detectors at airports. I always have the stupid feeling up process. One time I went through and they asked me why I wanted the pat-down. Refraining from smart aleck jokes, I told them it was because of my cochlear implant. They didn't believe me and asked me to take it out to show them. I showed them the external processor. They wanted to see the magnet part, despite my telling them it was under my scalp, placed in a niche in my skull where the bone had been removed. Even viewing the 3-inch scar, they still wanted to know why I couldn't take it off so I could have passed through the detector. It's not wise to challenge or to giggle at times like that. A supervisor came out, asked almost exactly the same questions, received the same answers, and then let me go after the pat-down. It's never happened again, but I must admit it blew my mind. Okay, so this topic is so far a wall-to-wall smearing of the TSA, which is absolutely hilarious, but hopefully we get some variety in soon. What on earth is the hiring process there? Is failing social studies, science, math, and physical education a compulsory criteria to get a job there? While getting hassled in a sobriety checkpoint, the cop asked the driver where he got his license. Our driver responded with, "The DMV." The cop didn't seem to know how to respond. Not a question, my sister's first name is Katie. Just Katie, not Catherine or Kathleen or anything. Just Katie. When my mum picked her up from preschool one day, the teacher said to my mother, "She won't respond to anything other than Katie." And my mum just went, "Yeah, well, that's her name." I'm currently 9 months pregnant and work in a restaurant. I'm very obviously pregnant. My belly is ginormous and the rest of me is small. I was seating this woman and she asked why I was limping. "It's called waddling, lady." I said, "Oh no, I'm not limping, I'm pregnant." She looked at my belly. "Pregnant? I would never have guessed that. How far?" 9 months. "Oh my god, are you going into labor now?" "Not to my knowledge." What the frick, people? At an interview, HR lady asked me to, quote, "Name 5 things you're not." I quipped, "Batman, a porcupine, on fire, purple, and bubblegum." She looked confused, made a note, and continued with the interview. I got the job. I work as a receptionist for a lawyer, and there's always a client who demands to speak to my boss even though I've told them already that he isn't in and the time he will be in. "I want to speak to the lawyer. He's in court at the moment, but he'll be here after 2 p.m. Did you want to leave a message or call back?" "No, I want to speak to him now." "Okay, great. I can speak to him?" "No, unfortunately, the lawyer is in court and won't be in the office until after 2 p.m. You can leave a message or call back after 2 p.m. when he's here." "What's in the bag, ma'am?" "My groceries? I checked out not 10 feet away from you. Bloody security." I got in a bullcrap accident with a taxi driver who thought lawsuits were part of his income. At the deposition, his lawyer kept asking and aggressively repeating questions that I have to assume trip some people up. His lawyer asked, in a condescending tone, "And why were you going to the library?" I looked right into his eyes and calmly said, "Because I like to read." Deposition over. What is this? He's going through my diabetes kit and found my Lancet cartridges. Really? It's a Lancet to prick my finger for diabetes blood glucose monitoring. I can't let you take this on the aircraft. Sir, that's not an option of yours. TSA policies specifically allow diabetes and other medical testing supplies. Get me your supervisor. We were interrupted by the supervisor ripping the crap out of him. Flat out dismissed him so he can study the policies again, apologized to me, and let me on my way. TSA can be flat out irritating at times, but some of them at least try not to suck. Took a job transfer to another country. I had all of my belongings in a rental truck. Border security. Why are you bringing a lawnmower into the country? Because I own it? I would have said to periodically reduce the length of grass on my property. My phone number is 1 digit away from a PNC bank, and I get calls about it once or twice a week. You'd be surprised how many people don't believe me when I try to correct them. The conversation always goes as follows. Hello, PNC? I say, sorry, you have the wrong number, and I give them the right one. That's what I dialed. Are you sure this isn't the PNC? Hold on, let me check. Alright, yes, I just double-checked. I'm in my boxers drinking beer and watching He-Man. I sincerely hope I'm not working in a bank right now. I'd probably lose my job. These phone calls are hilarious, and no, they never believe that they have the wrong number, and they think this is all a prank we're playing with our own livelihoods. I used to have a lot of people mistaking my number for a local restaurant. When I answered, hello, my name's speaking, this is not that restaurant, you would hear a few slow seconds of stupid face, followed by, is this the restaurant? Some people really want to will things into existence, I guess. When I was crossing the border from Canada to the States with my cousin, and the Border Patrol guy asked us how we're related, and we told him, and he said, you guys are cousins but have different last names. Explain that to me. And we just stared at him, and I started laughing. TSA asked me, would you do me a favor and type in your password for us? I said, no. I'm walking home from a friend's house in my neighborhood one night. As I'm crossing the street, a police officer shines his spotlight on me and says, hey kid, why are you crossing the road at this time of night? And without thinking, the smart aleck me says, to get to the other side. And with that, I was on my way. About 10 years ago, I worked at a fast food job and I had to wear a name tag, as one does at fast food jobs. A young guy came up to the counter one day, squinted at my name tag and said, John, is that your name? Nah, dude. They just give us these things with random names on them. I tried chatting up a girl at summer camp. I started and ended the conversation with, so, are you here for camp? My hair is very, very red, so I often get people who are incredulous as to its hue. However, because I'm pale, freckled, and have red eyebrows, people usually realize it's natural. Once a woman walked up to me, grabbed some of my hair and said, I love this color. What salon do you go to? I want them to do my hair just like this. I backed away, trying to get her to let go of my hair, and awkwardly said, no, it's my natural color, no salons for me. The woman then got really close to me and whispered, no, really, you don't have to lie to me. I know hair doesn't really come in this color, so where do you get it done? I promise I won't tell. Thank you for your story. I loved your work in Brave. I forgot my badge that gets me into work once. For some reason of all times, the head of security, who's an ex-cop, was working there. He asks me, why did you forget your badge? I just stared at him. Since I didn't make a conscious decision to not bring it, I had no idea what to say. Finally, I just said, I don't know how to answer that question. I lost a textbook in high school once, and the teacher, this lady who has a PhD in literature and wore business suits to teach 9th grade English to green herb smokers, was like, why did you lose your book? And demanded an answer. I was like, I thought it would be a good career move. She explained to me that it wasn't. I was in a deposition related to a car accident. The lawyer asked me, which car struck the other first? I turned to my lawyer and said, is she serious? Later in the same deposition, I was asked, what color was the green light? I did not care for that attorney. Wouldn't you rather be deposed by a stupid attorney than by a smart attorney? Once the TSA frisked my ponytail because it was, and I quote, too curly. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I suffered from a collapsed lung earlier this year, and shortly after, I was released from hospital, and a small party was thrown to celebrate me getting home after 26 days in hospital. A girl came up to me and asked, "So, can you, still breathe?" I said, "Of course not." I have a unique name, so this happens a lot. The question is, where did you get that name? From my parents. Almost 20 years ago, I sprained my ankle pretty bad and was taken to the hospital. The next day, a health insurance drone calls our house, wanting a very detailed account of how I got hurt. Her question was, and I quote word by word, "Now tell us, did you sprain your ankle first and then go to the hospital to x-ray your foot? Or did you go to the hospital for x-rays first and then sprain your ankle? Lady, are you freaking stupid or do you just like to pretend that you are?" I was once stopped at the Canadian-American border heading into Canada and was asked if I was carrying anything besides clothes into Canada. I replied, I've got a fifth of vodka in the back." Her next question was, "Do you have any alcohol or tobacco?" I have some vodka in the back." Look, I'm sure that there are perfectly smart border and airline security out there. I'm so sorry that this video is slandering the entire profession. This was not the purpose the narrator set out on. But my gosh, the good security staff out there must have some really interesting stories of their brain-dead colleagues trying to do basic tasks like prepare lunch and burning down the kitchen. Airport security officer asked me what the purpose of the metal wiring on my teeth served, which was a retainer. I told him it was so I could look beautiful. I was once pulled over on the highway for speeding. When the cop asked, "Do you know how fast you were going back there?" I didn't know, so I stared at my dash for a second, then finally answered, "Too fast?" The cop laughed and set me free with a warning. Victory. I once had the police call on me at college for juggling torches. The cop asked me what I was doing, and his next question was, "Why are you doing it outside?" I was at the Canada-US border, between Queenston and Lewiston, on my way to the War of 1812 reenactment at Fort Niagara, New York. I have a cooler in the back seat, a wooden box with a regular plastic cooler inside. It was empty at the time. The border guard asked, "Do you have any firearms or explosives in the cooler?" I said, "No, not in the cooler." "Okay, have a good trip." I did have 2 flintlock muskets and roughly 2 pounds of rifle powder in the trunk, which is why I added "not in the cooler." Another time, same reason and same border crossing, I was crossing with my cousin and they asked us about weapons again. We told them there's 5 flintlocks in the trunk and 4 pounds of rifle powder. The border guard doesn't really care about that, but asks 100 questions about the 9 6-foot wooden tent poles in the car. This one really confused me since it was September 21st, 2001, 10 days after the September 11th incident, and they're more worried about the tent poles than the pounds of explosive powder. I work at Dunkin' Donuts. Customer ordered a large coffee with cream and a medium black. When I handed them to him, he asked, "Which one is which?" I said, "The large one is the large." "If I buy this MacBook today, what will you give me?" A MacBook? TSA, while looking at our tickets, says to my brother, "Age." My brother had recently had a birthday, so he says, 14. No, 15. There was a pause, and then he said, "It changes every darn year." While working on my MA in clinical psychology, I attended a case conference class where we, as student therapists, would discuss our therapy clients over the last week. A young, naive, rich female student described an incident at the ER of the hospital where she worked. A man came in on a gurney that had been shot. I asked him how he felt and he said, "How do you think I feel, you stupid witch? I've been shot 6 times. You know, I really learned a lot that day. My neighbor asked me why I'd been at the system on a Tuesday, like it makes any difference what time punkt I buy my alcohol. Besides, it's Augusti. Never heard talas om en nubbe på kräftskivan." When I was in basic training with the army, our drill instructors would say, "Why is the sky blue?" The response we were supposed to give was, "Because God loves the infantry." Infantry color is blue in the US military. The first time my drill sergeant asked me this, I looked at him like he was an idiot and started going off about blue light refracting off the Earth's atmosphere. I used to ride a motorcycle. I used it to commute to work every day for several years. I'd be wearing my riding jacket and pants, boots, and holding my helmet, and someone would invariably ask, "So, you ride a motorcycle?" My standard reply became, "No, I just fall down a lot." TSA was looking at my ID. "Is this you?" Naturally, I say, "No, it's my evil twin." They give me a dirty look. "Please step aside over here, sir." Internally, I'm going, why God? This happened 2 months ago coming back from Florida. I had to stay back and answer 15 minutes worth of questions in order to prove that I'm not an enemy of America. I got into a car crash. Did you die? My twin sister was pulled by the TSA for having, quote, too many zippers on her pants. She was wearing cargo pants and had a total of 3 different zippers. What the frick, TSA? A cop pulled me over for doing 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Trying to come up with a witty line, he said, "Let me see your pilot's license." So I took out my wallet and produced my pilot's license. He let me go. Did he decide that you were in fact actually an aerial vehicle on an approved low pass over the highway? Did you destroy that poor policeman's reality? Walking through a Sam's Club, and the window installer guy comes up to me and goes, "Sir, how are your windows?" And I simply reply, "Oh, they're great, I can see right through them." At a fast food restaurant the other day, the cashier asks, "What would you like?" I say, "A sandwich and tea." "Anything else?" "Just the sandwich and tea." "Would you like anything to drink?" "Just the tea." I'm 23 and Australian. I travel on my own a fair amount. I arrived in the US and started going through customs when I was pulled off into a separate room. After they'd gone through everything, notebooks, texts, washing powder, he looked so very excited about the washing powder, he asked how I could afford to travel and take time off work. I passed, or whatever. After they gave me back my passport, I asked what the heck it was all about. They said, "You're a young female traveler. You might have been trying to get a job here." "Have you seen your economy?" He had no response to that. My tourist friend on their first day in New York goes up to the MTA employee at the desk. "Excuse me, what stop do I get off the subway to get to Grand Central?" "Grand Central." My dad told me a story when himself and his friends were out drinking underage one night and an officer had caught them. He grabbed a beer bottle that was thrown in the woods next to their car and said, "So, if I take this bottle down to the station, whose fingerprints am I going to find on it?" And my dad said, "Yours now, dummy." Customer says, "If you replace my broken air conditioner, will the new one cool my house?" I said, "If you turn down the thermostat." High school teacher here, one of my students asked, "Mr. Johnson, I checked the grades website and it currently said I have an 88. I'm wondering how far away I am from getting a 90. I said, "You're 2% away." I was answering as a joke while planning to follow up with a discussion of what skills she needs to work on to push through to an A. She says, "Okay, thanks." And then they just frickin' walked out before I could continue. Upon telling people my name, which is a short and unusual name in North America, people often ask me if it's short for anything. The answer is no. They always ask, "Are you sure?" And I glare at them a while, and when that doesn't sink in, "Oh, you're absolutely right. I totally forgot my name is short for," and I make up a bunch of random words. I once was asked the following by a girl who's definitely smart enough to know better while I was standing in front of her. "How was that competition you went to in Wisconsin? Wait, is it still going on? Are you still there?" When I was in recruit training for the US Marine Corps, our squad bay was on the first deck, or floor. One time, someone on a higher deck dropped a bag of trash out the window and some recruits saw it land on the ground and decided to tell the drill instructor about it. "Sir, this recruit just saw a crap bag fall from the second deck, sir." "By crap bag, do you mean recruit?" As a former US Army interrogator, I can say that part of our training is to make as few assumptions as possible in our questioning. I'll admit that asking the intention of eyeglasses sounds a little overboard, but some of the questions we were required to ask might make the person want to say, "Duh, isn't it self-evident?" I run into someone I know at the supermarket, and they always say, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here?" "Oh, just hunting elephants." "Excuse me, are there nuts in the butter pecan ice cream?" Also, "Do you sell ice cream here?" after walking past the ice cream case and staring at the menu for a good 5 seconds. I was once at the DMV and the lady asked me if I wore glasses while I was wearing my glasses. This is a legitimate question though. I was asked the same thing while wearing glasses, about to take my picture for my license. I just kinda laughed and asked her, is she required to ask that question? She said yes, because people come in with glasses that aren't prescription, and if they mark that the lenses are required and they're really not, if the person gets pulled over, an officer can write a ticket for not wearing prescription lenses. Some jerk cop pulled me over thinking that I was drunk, noticed my bottle of water in the back seat. He angrily asks me, "What's in that bottle?" "Water." "Why the hell do you carry a bottle of water in your car?" "For drinking." Yada yada yada. Back in high school, I'd gone about 3 days without sleep and was in the principal's office for skipping class, and I was sitting on the chair in front of him, dozing off, generally looking messed up. He said, hardly sincerely, "Are you on something?" I looked at him puzzled for a second and thought of it, so I said, "Yep, a chair." He never liked me. My friend Bonnie is always asked what her name is short for. She answers Bonniesaurus Rex. Rawr. Scientists. What mad supervillain experiment do you actually want to conduct in real life? I want to do a long-term case study on children's microbiome. It would start off with samples of their mother's microbiome, and then when the child is first born, get a sample of theirs, compare it, and continue comparing the two samples throughout chest feeding versus bottle feeding. Also, get a detailed comparison of how the microbiome changes after vaccinations, sickness, and antibiotics. I would basically study every single number 2 this child has, their eating habits, their health conditions, any medications and vaccinations for years. But people want privacy and most wouldn't want to commit to keeping such accurate accounts of their children's food, health, and activities. So it's likely that even if I did this study, it would be difficult to prove all variables were accounted for. And with all the variability, I would need many, many children. The end goal is to see how our microbiome changes throughout your childhood, and note when you may be more susceptible to things depending on the type of microflora you have. Everyone has a different ratio, so essentially, if we can harness the individual's capability of unique flora, we could find a whole new way to tackle illnesses and preventatives for sicknesses that would have significantly less side effects than many other medications. This idea stems from others studying the microbiome and finding that certain ratios of microflora can cause you to get over illnesses quicker when combined with the right medicine, and also help digestive tracts regulate better. But so far, these tests are being done with cancer patients. I think if we're able to see how children are affected, it may bring less possibilities of terminal illness and other illnesses down the road, as well as a faster recovery. And everyone is telling me to have a kid or become a nanny and collect the number 2? No, the point of this study is that it needs to include thousands of participants. I want to take DNA from infamous serial unalivers like Jeffrey Dahmer or Albert Fish or the like and clone them, then have the baby raised in a normal, supportive, loving family. I'd study the kids all through adulthood to see how much is nurture and how much is nature. I experiment on ancient coins. Museums are generally against me doing a full compositional analysis that would involve me dissolving the whole coin in acid, but it sure would tell us a lot more than not. As a student of history, I can confirm that just about every person in my field would have had massive issues with this. However, I'm not sure that the results would lead to any true mad scientist outcome, just a bunch of crying museum custodians and a slightly better idea of the composition of ancient coins. I'm a physician, and I would love to see how far the placebo effect really goes. For those who aren't familiar, the placebo effect is an unexplained phenomena where people who take medications that aren't real but believe they're real have an actual measurable effect on their illness. People with depression who take sugar pills report feeling happier. People with pain who take sugar pills report a decrease to their pain, among other things. I've seen even crazier ones where people think they're having surgery for their bad knee, but the docs just put them under, make an incision on their knee, do nothing, sew them back up, and patients report improvement to their bad knee. So part of me just wants to explore this crap to its full extent. Can we treat chronic illnesses like arthritis, lupus, and bipolar disorder with just placebos? Can you imagine if someone's human immunodeficiency virus viral load decreased while they were eating Skittles and thinking it's a new miracle drug? But it's pretty much just fantasy. You'd have to take two groups of the same disease's positive individuals, give one real medicine and the other one Skittles, and this is profoundly unethical. For those of you who are saying that's how clinical trials work, the answer is not really. According to Article 11.3 of the Declaration of Helsinki, which is the ethical guidance of clinicians overseeing clinical trials, it's unethical to use placebo arms if there exists a proven medication for the condition. If you're testing a new drug on your control group, it's whatever the best treatment available on the market is, not a placebo. It's very rare that a disease or condition has no effective treatments out there that would justify the use of a placebo to measure clinical effectiveness. In my human immunodeficiency virus example, this is obviously not plausible. We have meds that lower that particular disease's viral load already. I would like to clone myself. Nature versus nurture. Sorry dude, you can have as many kids as possible with one woman, but you can't clone yourself. I can't even do it once. Identical twins is totally fine also. Experiments with social isolation intrigue me. Raise a child with no language and see what happens. No contact. Wild children give us some insights, but also a sample of the kind of trauma this can produce. Completely and undeniably unethical, incredibly cruel, but so intriguing. This has already been done and documented in the past. There was this king who believed that children raised in complete isolation would naturally speak Greek. So to test this, he ordered a group of babies to be placed in isolation from adults. And a few times per day, midwives would feed or clean them, and the result of this experiment was that every single baby died even though they were being fed. This reminds me of the chicken boy. The poor child was locked in a chicken coop for the first few years of his life, and as such, he thought he was a chicken. Absolutely tragic, but still fascinating. I want to work on genetically modifying the genes that control our active cones in our eyes. Specifically, I want to try to activate a tertiary cone in the eyes of dogs so that they can see infrared light just like snakes can. In simpler terms, we could make rescue dogs that have infrared vision to help locate missing people or recover people in natural disasters. In even simpler terms than that, I want to make heat-seeking dogs. I want a substance-heavy Olympics where everyone is using something to enhance their performance, to see the true limit of humans. Now, I wouldn't say mad scientist, but medical privacy laws get in the way of a lot of incredibly useful research. Everything has to be so de-identified and confidential that it makes doing any sort of large-scale statistics nearly impossible. You have to make a ton of assumptions because you can't know many details. If I had full access to everyone's medical records, we would probably fix a whole lot of crap. Yeah, I have to admit, it is fascinating to listen to our actual medical and science PhD people talk about the possibilities we could unlock if all ethics were removed. On the other hand, I can see why we can't do these experiments. Take the following one, for example. I'd want to know how long it would take a group of children raised to puberty to figure out about doing the deed. I'm sure they'd figure out pickle and bean tickling on some level, but how long would it take them to figure out tab A into slot B? The subjects could be raised about as normal as possible, but with any mentioning of reproduction and copulation completely removed. And there would be no shame or deterrent while they figure it out. Like the caretakers wouldn't tell them we don't do that if they found out one was whacking the mule, or that two consenting teenagers were touching each other. There would be some kind of explanation with trying to encourage that kind of stuff in private instead of around the others. I'm just curious about how our urge to merge is kind of instinctual in other animals. It doesn't really seem that way with us. We learn from so many different sources nowadays that we don't need to figure it out ourselves. We have the internet, friends and peers, maybe parents, books, TV, and possibly life skills classes in school. What would it be like if we just didn't teach or explain or acknowledge it and see how long it took them to figure it out themselves? There have been documented stories where virgin couples have gone to see a doctor because they couldn't get preggers, and it's been discovered that all they've been doing is lying in bed together and waiting for something to happen. I also read a story once where the guy was inserting his eggplant into the wrong place. Like geographically, he was way off. The typical discovery and clinical testing pipeline of a pharmaceutical process looks something like this. cell culture, to rodent models, to other animals like primates or rabbits, to humans. If at any step the substance fails the test, either for toxicity or efficacy, the potential medication is nixed, and this process of discovery and clinical testing can take up to 10 years at the cost of billions of dollars. What happens if your model systems can't fully recapitulate the human disease phenotype? So what happens is you've got a medicine that might work really well in the human, but we never know because it gets trashed because there's no response in the house model. Now, I completely understand the ethical concerns with testing on human subjects from the get-go, but if you ask me to don my mad scientist lab coat and goggles, I'd try to push for earlier testing on human subjects. Use the milk from orb spiders to build a better dental filling. By the way, they mix the DNA of spiders with goats at University of Wyoming. From my understanding, these fillings would hypothetically last exponentially longer, would bond to teeth as an organic substance, and are stronger than Teflon. It would also be minimally invasive as to set the groundwork for more invasive medical applications, such as knee replacements. If you fund me, I know the orb goat and dental guys. Identical twins have very similar DNA. If raised exactly the same way without interaction with each other, would they make the same choices? There have been studies done where separated twins chose the same career, marry a woman by the same name, and maybe even call their kids by the same names. It was crazily specific. This actually was a pretty horrifying experiment in the US in the 60s, where they purposefully split twins and adopted them out to separate parents to study them. The documentary 3 Identical Strangers is about it, and really interesting. I'd never do the experiment, but it's hard to overstate how helpful it would be to have large-scale, longitudinal data on how different chemotherapeutic meds and med cocktails affect the evolutionary trajectory of tumors. The problem is that in order to study it, you'd need to 1. Give a large number of people experimental or substandard care, which is highly unethical, and 2. Perform serial surgeries even when they aren't medically necessary, in order to collect tissue samples from the tumors. And since every surgery carries with it some risks, this is also highly unethical. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I would really love to have a hunk of plutonium in the attic above my bedroom. I mean, the right amount would have to be sussed out first, of course. They found out that some buildings in Japan had been made with irradiated steel from stockyards near the blast zones of either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and the people that lived in them had abnormally long and cancer-free lives, presumably because, there's a scientific term for it where your body comes into some kind of homeostasis with snake venom over long enough exposure to small doses. They think that's what happened with those people and the radiation as well. Their bodies adapted to it and became far less prone to having the big C disease because of it. Also, it would lower my heating bill in the winter. Plus, I really wish we could just use molten salt reactors as well. Honestly, I think the government should give them away to property owners, as it would benefit the United States greatly to have a populace of people off the power grid, powering themselves independently and greenly with a stable power source that'll last more than 100 years for their needs, all while depleting our vast nuclear waste reserves. The economy would benefit, people would be more able to afford housing, and emissions would go down. Again, this is a very interesting idea that could benefit a lot of the human race as a whole, assuming that it goes perfectly to plan and nobody uses the abundance of available radioactive material that would result from it for their own nefarious needs. And we all know that if people can do something bad for their own personal benefit, they would. It's interesting to hear about, though. I'm a chemist, and the answer is anything. Biophysicist here, I would love to investigate CRISPR technology in vivo cancer patients, using the technology to block cleavage from occurring at specific DNA sites. I've studied this in vitro, but experimenting in a live human being could be risky waters. Electrostimulation as a means of regrowing limbs sounds pretty interesting, and I'd love to see the effects on humans. If I recall correctly, one of the problems with this is that the wound site must be kept fresh, and humans bleed out too damn quickly if their wounds aren't able to clot, which would interrupt the growth. Animal and human hybrids. transferring consciousness to a computer so we can live forever, or reproductive cloning so everyone can have their own organs for transplantation. I mentioned this in stem cell class one day, and I've been the weird girl ever since. Just having organs or the whole body intact, practically alive but only kept around to service your needs when you need it? If you could clone a whole human body that came to life and interacted in daily life, would it still be your spare organ farm or a whole new human? There's also the problem of the body and organs having the same predisposition you do, so what if your heart that you'd cloned had the same defaults as your now failing heart? I'd love to study language development, like sticking a bunch of babies on a remote island without outside influence and document how they learn to communicate. I want to create miniature elephants. Through ingenious genetic manipulation, I'll be able to miniaturize any living animal. And yeah, I know there's a South Park reference, and also a Jurassic Park the book reference. Mostly, I want a cuddly mini plant that I can socialize as a lovely companion, all while spiking municipal water supplies to shrink the general population and go Godzilla on their butts. That's what you get for making fun of my homemade pie, Karen. I'm an InfoSec guy. Do security researchers count as scientists yet? And I'd love to do social engineering experiments, but they're either illegal or immoral. I'd like to raise babies in various planned conditions, such as without any adult human interaction, without language, indoors only, with different concepts of a family unit, with different concepts of gender roles, and many, many more. Stem cells. Screw morals. Frick where the cells come from, and frick religious objections. Can I fix a person who had a stroke and has half their body paralyzed? In the immortal words of Peter Griffin, why are we not funding this? Transhumanism. I want to see a heavier push towards prosthesis and the like. I have a healthy interest in immortality. We're already seeing huge advancements in prosthetics, biohacking, and extended lifespans. I'm happy to say that out of all of the things in the video up to this point, this one is actually coming along quite well. And it's been around for a very long time when you consider old-timey dental work, hearing aids, pacemakers, among other things. It's not even a question of how, only when. However, considering the insecure nature of most portable devices, IoT in general, the good will come with an unhealthy amount of bad. Say, that's a really nice, super strong prosthetic arm you've got there. It would be a shame if it went all idle hands on you. The narrator finds the prospect of transhumanism oddly terrifying, despite the fact that people would presumably be free to opt out of immortality. There is something highly unnerving to me where we can just choose to not die. I can't put my finger on why, it's a myriad of reasons. Mostly I feel like our brains would continue to degrade despite how much we slow that process, meaning we end up with a bunch of dementia-ridden cyborgs incapable of governing ourselves in the end until we all just break down. Serious answer. I'd take about 1 billion people, lock them into a completely contained living space for their entire lives, and actually science the crap out of what people eat and what their reaction is to what they eat. I would measure every single molecule that goes in and every single molecule that goes out. Measure their weight, their level of hunger, the level of physical activity, everything. What they breathe in, what they breathe out. Number 1, number 2, measure every excretion. We'd know exactly if broccoli is good or if cigarettes are bad or if you should eat eggs. This is obviously impossible and cruel, inhumane, and I would never even suggest it, but at least we'd know if we should eat eggs for breakfast or not. Grafting artificial muscles, even though I don't have any qualifications and stuff. I wouldn't be perceived as a mad scientist, just a profligate researcher. I'd be castigated and my professional reputation would be irrevocably altered, but I'd like to establish the UK's first body farm, so we can replicate University of Tennessee's facility to meticulously research human decomposition. Ostensibly, I'd be indulging my personal predilection for prestige, as the justification for a body farm isn't compelling for some entomologists. It's a vanity project in their opinion. Others condemn the idea as a frivolous tourist attraction. People are amenable to donate, we just have nowhere to put them. I work mainly with snake venom, but my friend called me and told me his brother-in-law knows a guy that harvests scorpion venom. It's prohibitively expensive normally, but this guy insisted you didn't have to go through the normal process of acquiring it. So I'm imagining a sweatshop situation with various containers of scorpion venom. I feel like buying and possessing an old milk jug of scorpion juice would at least make me seem mad, to say the least. You'd be a rich mad lad though. Doesn't scorpion venom go for about $40 million per gallon? Use targeted injections of virally encoded opsins, like channel rhodopsins, and some simple signal-to-light converters to get ESP. See into the UV or far red? Sure, why not? Take in Wi-Fi-based data or EMF data? Cool, let's do it. Anything you can build a detector for, if reasonably small, you could then encode in some area of your brain. You could also swap in and out the detector as needed. Going into the dark? Let's go for some infrared. Going for a hike in the woods? How about some inbuilt GPS? I'm left-handed and I've always heard lefties are right-brained or creative and righties are left-brained or logical. I'd like to create a school, pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, that includes boarding where the only difference is that everything inside the school, door handles, computer mouses, sports equipment and scissors, are accommodated for left-handed people. The teachers would all be left-handed as well, but the students will be the usual mix of 90% right-handed and 10% left-handed. Would right-handed kids in this environment use their right brain more because they're forced to be more creative? Would the left-handed kids become more right-brained? Biologist here, and I want to develop an artificial system to grow a baby outside of the womb. The initial tests would involve a donor uterus, likely from a pig or a primate unless we can get a healthy one from a human hysterectomy, which would be connected to an artificial blood supply. This blood supply would be circulated through the 37C incubator using a pump to mimic the heartbeat. As the embryo develops, different chemicals will be pumped into the bloodstream to maintain appropriate levels of HCG, estrogen, progesterone, oxygen, and nutrients. I'd also need to develop a way to efficiently filter out waste. If we could robotize this process, you could leave it running for 9 months and get a fully developed baby without destroying your body. This would also eliminate things like fetal alcohol syndrome and other negative effects of poor diet or substance use during pregnancy. Of course, having said all that, it's highly unethical to test on humans and probably shouldn't be done. Also, very difficult to get all the chemicals and blood compositions right. Astronomer here. I would really love to get a hunk of a neutron star and bring it back to Earth and study it. Neutron stars are, as the name implies, essentially a ball of neutrons where the amount of mass in the sun is squeezed into the size of a city. This means they're extremely dense, well beyond the labs on Earth, thus we don't know much about their properties and how they work. For example, a small fraction of neutron stars give off a beam of radio radiation, which we see as it roars around. So we call them pulsars. What actually gives off the radio beam in the first place? No one really knows. It probably has something to do with magnetic fields in a young neutron star, and we've found a class called magnetars where the magnetic field would kill you if you got within 1,000 kilometers of one. But yeah, no one has a clue how those magnetic fields get so strong either. So in conclusion, if anyone has an idea on how to get me some rocket tech to visit one in an evening, 60s cartoon villain style, let me know because I'm gonna go get a neutron star. Self-cloning. I want to know if I have a better chance at life if my double or clone is raised by a person who cares, instead of by the awful people who gave my start a huge disadvantage, to put it mildly. No, I'm not blaming them, or even if I am, it's still my job to take care of myself no matter what happened in the past. A person with my IQ and capabilities should be so much more successful instead of gradually having to make it up to zero, to emerge from a black hole of anxiety, self-doubt, and trying to make it as a loner. I want to see what happens with my generous intellectual and creative gifts if I were to actually nurture and mentor myself. Well, I'm just a student studying IT, but I'm still really interested in speciation and evolution. I remember watching a documentary about Hiroshima, I think, and how the insects have went through about 40 generations, so they've adapted to the point where they can filter out radiation. But the horses in the area are filled with it because they haven't had much generations in the radiation. So basically, I want to introduce mice, mainly because they reproduce quickly, into different environments that slowly become harsher and harsher in an attempt to make them evolve. Like, I want to make them completely aquatic, where they no longer need land and are able to live off only seaweed, or where their back legs basically become like a kangaroo that can jump really high to get around. Idiots of the internet. What is the stupidest thing you've done? Responded to my own Craigslist ad looking for a roommate. I literally thought, oh, she sounds cool, and only realized after I received the email from myself. I was riding my bike and wondered what would happen if I stuck my feet in the spokes of my front tire. The answer? Flipped over the handlebars, broke my 2 front teeth, and I got road rash on half my face. Late for work, running around the house looking for my keys. Ran upstairs, saw them on the desk, pointed at them and said to the air, "There they are!" I was nearly back at the front door when I realized I hadn't actually picked them up. I got pretty wasted on tranquilizers and booze. That would already be stupid enough, but my sauced-up brain had bigger plans. Being done with my bender, I decided to go home by public bus, which I'd just missed and could see driving down the road. So I did exactly what would be the reasonable and responsible thing to do. I flagged down the cop car that was approaching and asked him to pull over the bus. He asked if I'd been drinking, so I said, yes, that's why I'm taking the bus home instead of driving. He said he'd give me a lift and I got in. I have no recollection of what happened until the next day, but my mum told me a very nice police officer dropped me off at home and I'd drooled all over his back seat. I work as a substitute middle school teacher. At the beginning of each day, the kids listen to the announcements. One time, they announced that one of the students who'd been battling a terminal illness passed away the night before. So me, being the great guy that I am, decided to give the students 5 minutes of time to sit quietly and reflect. Then I decided to lighten the mood by calling attendance. So I used bizarre inflection to entertain the students. I called out, "Tyler?" No response. Called it out again, no response. Finally, one student piped up and said that was the kid that we'd just had a 5-minute silence for. This was after I'd called out his name several times with differing tones of voice to be comical, while all the students saw was me bashing the dead kid. Frick. Oh boy, all of these so far, apart from the tranquilizer one, are things that the narrator could imagine themselves doing. But this final one especially. Well-meaning joke to get the poor kids to smile turns into a horrible, disrespectful moment. Well done. In a spelling bee, I spelled the word Python Python. I was quickly reminded that eth is not a letter, though to this day I think that maybe it should be. I woke up one night, I saw a hand on my pillow, started to freak out, froze, waited, decided I'd move, screamed and jumped when the hand moved. It was my hand. I once fell asleep with my hand above my head, so it fell completely asleep. In the middle of the night, a hand flopped onto my chest, completely numb. So I woke up with a hand on my chest that I couldn't feel. Scared the crap out of me. I turned left onto a one-way street, where I should have gone right. That wasn't so bad until I panicked and then did a U-turn around the median onto yet another one-way street. Still going the wrong way. Enter my first and only car accident. I tooted one time when I was little. I thought, how can I get my bum to stop smelling so bad? My solution? Spray air freshener up my butt. I spent the next couple of minutes writhing in pain with a burning booty hole. I stapled my finger to see if stapling my finger was possible. Can confirm, it is. I let my friend shoot me with a blowgun dart we bought at the flea market. It hurt a lot at first, but then Bautista won the Royal Rumble on PPV an hour later and everything went numb. And 3 days later, our video of me being shot with it was featured on The Soup. One time I went through the drive-thru at Dunkin' Donuts and stopped at the trash can instead of the speaker for about 5 to 8 minutes, repeatedly saying, "Hello?" I work in fast food answering in drive-thru a lot of the time, and you just made me laugh so hard. Thanks. I have a theory that people switch over to their reserve brain or something when they get to a drive-thru speaker box. They just do and say weird things. Went back to a girl's house after dinner. She had early class the next day, so gets ready for bed, but says I can stay and keep her company for a while. Laying in her bed, she's in silk pajamas, I'm fully clothed. We're just talking, and I start running my hand up and down her back. She says, you'd better stop that, I'm getting turned on. So I stopped, like a fricking idiot. I hole-punched my hair, thinking that I'd get a perfect little circle all surrounded by hair. I was so shocked when it cut my hair and I just couldn't understand why for far too long of a time. I put an umbrella handle in my mouth and pushed the button to release the umbrella. I thought the umbrella would shoot out the front of my mouth and open. Instead, the handle extended back into my mouth and broke my front teeth. No idea why I thought that. I was 11 and I thought for about 5 months I'd invited the act of flicking the bean and even told my friends about it. That ended up being my 5 months of fame. PE in high school. We did quite a bit of rope climbing and it felt great. I didn't really know what was going on, but I absolutely loved rope climbing. I used to be too scared to go on the roof of the gym, but when things started feeling good, I'd climb like there was no tomorrow. I asked some of my classmates if they felt the same way, but never got a straight answer out of them. I had the same thing, only with a pole that stood on the playground. So basically, I was a pole dancer at the age of 10. I clicked on an adult video link at work, thinking that if I closed the window really fast, the system wouldn't know. I mean, that kinda works. You were looking at adult material? No, sir, it was one of those stupid pop-up ads. Got me right when I clicked. I closed it immediately, you can see it in the system. If I was actually looking at that material, wouldn't you see a lot more connections made just beyond the one? And then they check the records and it shows you're right. When I was younger, I got kicked out of ballet class because I kept running into the mirrors thinking they were open windows or like portals to another world or something. Last weekend, my friend asked for a ride across town since he left his phone at a bar the previous night. Somehow I heard car instead of phone, so I dropped him off and drove home. I don't answer calls while I'm driving since I'm a bad driver too, so I didn't realize I missed 3 of his calls until I got home. I'm sure there's others, but my memory's going pretty fast as well. Not me, but a friend of mine was dead serious and asked, why don't wheelchairs have pedals for when your arms get tired? A friend came to my house, knocked on my door. When I answered it, I was greeted with, "Hey, are you home?" The narrator hopes that the answer was a stern no, followed by you slamming the door on their face and just waiting to see what they did next. Namely, I'm interested in if they believed you and went home. Missed the school bus and potential rides to school one morning because I couldn't find my backpack. Eventually, realized it was on my back. I asked my wife, who was upstairs, to drop my phone down to me. As it was falling, I thought it would be cool to catch a phone with one finger. It wasn't cool. When my girlfriend asked why I was always late when going to her place, my response was, I'm only late for things that aren't important. I was going number 2 once while browsing Reddit. I wiped my butt with the other hand, stood up and threw my phone in the toilet. I just stood there and said, what the frick? And looked at my duty-covered toilet paper. One of my exes and I met in the city. We always went on dates in the city and never close to where we lived. I'd just moved to the area. I'd heard of the place he lived in, but I didn't think it was close to where I lived and never really thought about it. Then I started staying over at his place, and when I was going home the following afternoons, I'd take the tram into the city center for 20 minutes and then the bus to get to my house, another 40 minutes. I honestly thought the village he lived in was far from my house, so I took the route I knew. Turns out he lives a 10-minute walk away. I did this like 8 times. When I was a kid, I had this genius idea. People are in wheelchairs because they can't lift their legs to walk, right? So what if you tied a length of string around your knee, held onto the other end, and marched yourself around like a puppet? I even named my genius invention. I called it leg reins. It never occurred to me that if you were paralyzed, you wouldn't be able to balance. It also didn't occur to me that I wasn't actually lifting my legs with my arms, I was doing it with my legs. I somehow didn't realize that the reason my dad got me to demonstrate my idea to everyone he knew, one after another whenever someone came over, was not because he was proud of the towering intellect his son possessed. I once started talking crap about a friend who I'd forgotten we'd just picked up and was sitting in the back seat of the car. This one still keeps me up at night. At a job I worked long ago, the crew boss had forgotten he had agreed to give Dave a ride home that night. We cut lawns at various places and Dave wasn't so good at it. We drove past one of those places on the way home and my boss started ranting. Fricking Dave, he missed half that lawn, it looks like crap. That guy is dumb as a rock. Dave quietly spoke up from the back seat. I'm trying my best. It was pretty quiet for the rest of the ride home. Similar story, but a friend of mine was talking about a girl he was trying to do the deed with that night. And yeah, she was sitting in the back seat and heard the entire thing. It was horrifying for everyone involved. I tied a couch behind a truck with tow straps. I rode on the couch down a gravel road. I smelled burning as the couch legs began to catch fire from friction. The couch leg catches in a pothole and bucks me 5 feet into the air. I have a brief moment of immediate regret. I spend next week sitting very carefully as my butt no longer had any skin on it. The barber, while cutting my hair, asks, "What do you do for a living?" And I replied, "I'm an accountant. You?" This happens in movie theaters and airports all the time. Enjoy the show. You too. Have a good flight. You too. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I had the squirts at the beach from eating seafood, and still decided to go on a long walk. I ended up stranded and found a log facing the beach to sit on and surreptitiously go number 2. I covered everything in the big sandbox as it were, pulled up my bikini bottoms and felt relief, only to stand up and realize that there was an entire family sitting on their beach house deck behind me. They saw everything. Unable to find my phone, in a complete state of panic, I sent my friend a text asking, "Dude, did I leave my phone at your place? I can't find it anywhere." And he replied, "What are you using to send this text, genius?" I have never in my life been so ashamed. I once lost my phone, so I used my phone's light to search for it. I was in a bus, school trip. I even turned the phone back on when it locked the screen. Good times. The best part is I even asked a friend to help me while I pointed the light to his face. One time I tried to pass wind while playing online poker really late while my girlfriend was asleep. About half of the toot came out before I realized more was on its way out too. I caught that before it was too late and jumped up and started to run to the bathroom. I had headphones on and I yanked my head to the left and pulled my PC over as I kicked a 25-pound weight on the floor, broke my toe, and then crapped all over myself. If this doesn't convince people to buy wireless headsets, I don't know what will. Listen, some of us need really high-quality wired headsets for our gaming or our jobs processing and monitoring vast amounts of audio files. That said, this failure is spectacular. One of those times where the transition to 30 seconds before, happily playing your PC, to the present in pain, with a balked computer and covered in your own feces, just seems so impressive. The girl of my dreams came back to my place after dinner and drinks. We had been friends for a long time, but never a hint of anything more. I was in a sleeping bag on the floor. She told me, "Hey, you can jump up and under the quilt to get warm." And my response was, "Oh, the sleeping bag is really warm." It wasn't until the next day that I realized what I'd done. Wow, thinking about this makes me really depressed. That reminds me of something like that happening to me. I was sitting on the couch with this girl I knew, watching a movie. In the middle of it, she lays down and keeps trying to get comfortable and inching her way towards me. I finally noticed and said I'd get her a pillow and set her up a nice little spot on the other side of the couch. I'm so dumb. I once walked right into a road sign. I passed away and woke up in an alley. For real. When I was younger, I went on a date. Things started to get hot and heavy, so she grabbed my hand and put it up her skirt. I didn't know what to do down there, so I just cupped her hoo-ha for an hour. I once thought it would be a good idea to take 3 hits of a hallucinogenic substance and go to my cousin's middle school dance recital. It wasn't a good idea. It was a bad idea. It was a very fricking bad idea. Mine was one of those moments of true stupidity. I was finishing on the John and about to go to bed. I stood up and flushed. As I did, I thought I heard something plop into the bowl. I instantly reached in and, to my delight, grabbed the first thing I felt in my hand. I came up with a turd. I have 2. The first is the time I ended up in the hospital because of pasta. One night I was doing dishes that I'd left out for about a week. You know, uni life. And there was a piece of pasta heavily crusted into the bottom of the pot. I couldn't get it off with a sponge or with the brush I was using, so I tried to pick it off with my nails. I managed to pick a little bit too hard, and boom, the pasta shard is under my thumbnail up to about the halfway point. About 10 seconds later, my finger was dripping blood and I realized that the pasta was actually getting cooked by my blood, and visions of awful infections started to run through my head. I decided to play it safe and go to the ER, and the doctor that ended up seeing me 3 hours later told me that I'd made the right choice coming in, which made me feel a little bit better. A couple of scalpels, some surgical scissors, and 30 minutes of excruciating pasta extraction later, I walked out of the hospital missing half of my thumbnail. It hurt like an absolute witch for the next week. I was told that I was the only pasta-related injury any of the doctors in the hospital at the moment had ever seen. The second time is the time I literally tried to be a helicopter and broke my wrist. I was 4 years old and on a field trip with my kindergarten class. It was lunchtime and we were all sitting on a jungle gym eating our lunches. For whatever reason, I decided it was a good idea to stop eating my lunch and walk to the top of the jungle gym so I could jump off. Don't ask me to explain it, it's been 17 years and I'm still amazed at my own inexplicable stupidity. I'm fortunate not to have won a Darwin Award so far. I'd recently learned what a hechelopter was, and was amazed that they could fly just by spinning things around. My flawless logic of the day was, if they can do it, why can't I? So seemingly without any discernible reason, little 4-year-old me put down his sandwich, marched to the top of the jungle gym, put his arms out at his sides and jumped off while spinning around in my best hechelopter impression. And that was how I got my first ambulance ride. In short, I accidentally tested ancient Chinese torture tactics on myself and also tried to be a helicopter at one point. I think so many people's stupidest moments can be summed up with, I can probably make this jump, every single time. Hey guys, look, Mario just posted his answer. After a night of drinking, we went back to my then-boyfriend's place to chill. He turned on the TV, but I had other ideas. I pulled the rolling chair away from his computer desk, placing myself between him and the TV. I turned the chair backwards, threw my leg over in what I thought was going to be a seductive manner, whipped my hair a little, and ended up putting my foot down on the edge of the wheelie part on the other side. I rolled my ankle and my momentum carried me all the way over to the floor. I hit the ground, the chair back smashed my face, and my nose started bleeding. Not my brightest moment. I asked my friend if he got his car back from the garage while we were sitting in it. I am not a smart man. I was in a wheelchair in the hospital room, with my leg propped up with the wheelchair leg holder. The doctor said my sock needed to be taken off for him to look, so someone went forward to do it for me. And I was like, no, it's cool, I got it, and leaned over to take my sock off. Turns out the brakes weren't on the wheelchair. The whole wheelchair leaned forward and I landed right on my propped out foot and sprained ankle. Let's see, where to start? I once killed a pint of vodka straight on a dare. Spent the rest of the night ralphing. I fell for a prank of laying a stick across a shovel handle and then stomping the shovel spade to see how high the stick would go. I had my windshield tinted to 5% on my car. I sent a Nairobi prince some cash so I'd get a big return. Yeah, I actually did do this. I voted for Ross Perot in '92. I volunteered for several things in boot camp without knowing what they were. I rear-ended a cop car. During the questioning, I got the involuntary giggles, and when the cop asked if I thought it was funny, I said yes. In Little League, I chased a ball under the bleachers from the backside. Imagine running fast as the bleacher seats get lower and lower. I cracked my head open. I hit on a starting linebacker's girlfriend at a frat party. I even knew it was his girlfriend. Noticed my low oil pressure light on in the car, decided I could make it to the next exit 10 miles away. I took bowling as a hypers class in college, cheated on the final exam and got caught. Decided to jump in the water to piss. Left the boat in gear. Spent half an hour trying to pick up a quarter that someone else had superglued to a sidewalk. I'm really not as dumb as all this sounds, I'm just impulsive. Damn it, Kevin, is that you again? This sir or madam is very hard to pin down. On the one hand, they're self-aware enough to know that all of these things are dumb. On the other hand, half an hour picking up the quarter? To get a refresher on who or what Kevin was, watch our video, Teachers. What's your "that student definitely isn't going places" moment? Although maybe it's not him and it's this next guy. I fell asleep on a roof. A slanted roof. I rolled over. Ever have one of those dreams where you're falling? I woke up just before I hit the ground. I rode my bike under a truck. I made a slingshot that fired metal plates through trees. I took these plates off my father's cars and bikes. I made a stump remover, basically an IED for farm work. Got confused and got the measurements wrong. I figured this out while a 2-ton stump was about 80 feet in the air. I thought that my knife juggling skills would impress girls at a party. I'd been drinking heavily for that one. Did the deed on a trampoline. Advice: if you ever want to try that, don't. Your member can break. I also did the deed in the water at a beach. Advice: if you want to try this, don't. Sand gets everywhere, especially if you're uncircumcised. I shot myself with a .22 bullet. Not the gun, just the bullet. Well, and a hammer. I took half a pound of gunpowder to school. Tried to write my name on the football field. Turns out the guy with the distinctive name and no eyebrows can easily be identified. Another time I tried to jump a fence on a motorcycle. A barbed wire fence. Strangely, if this had gone just a little worse, the beach thing would have gone better. Parked my dad's car the wrong way, i.e. in a swimming pool. Tried to help a dog who'd been hit by a car. Had a large portion of my face torn open. That being said, I would do that one again. Lots more, but I'm a little tired. My wife thinks I'm stupid, by the way. People who've been clinically dead. Is there an afterlife? I was dead for 6 whole minutes. I was lying on the gurney and I was getting colder. However, at some point, my body actually started warming up and everything became really calm and peaceful. I was no longer in pain. The noise from ER just kind of went away. It was really enjoyable. I was thinking about my daughter and I was remembering all the things we had done. Slowly, it was just going black and nothing. There was no knowledge of anything. I explain it as it was like before I was born. Then, the worst thing in the world is being revived. I started hearing loud noises, I felt this massive pain, then there was the nastiest stench ever. The smell was like every dead animal had crawled in my nose. It was so bad that I started chucking up. I remember the doctors turning me on my side and watching me spray on a nurse. Dying was the most pleasant thing I've ever experienced, and being revived was the worst. Not really sure what happened, and it still freaks me out to this day. My daughter was 4 and developed pneumonia. Her breathing would stop in her sleep, so we took her into the emergency room. She was there for a total of 5 days. For the first 3, her health kept deteriorating, and on the 3rd day, my girlfriend got a call that her mother had collapsed and was taken to the hospital. She was without oxygen for 20 minutes and was declared brain dead. That night, my daughter woke up and asked about Grandma. No one had said anything to her or been in the room with her. We asked her what she meant, and she told us that Grandma came to her in a dream and said, "It's not your time yet. I'll go for you." Immediately the next day, my daughter was almost 100% better. Anaphylaxis. Wasn't breathing. I considered all the hallucinations I experienced likely due to hypoxic episodes until I told my mum what I saw. A middle-aged man who wasn't in scrubs, standing still at the end of my bed, while all the staff were running around and doing their business. I was having a non-verbal conversation with him, and he was telling me to calm down, focus on breathing. He wore a tropical-style button-down shirt, one of those old-school newsboys' hats, and had a very pleasant demeanor. Mum showed me a photo of my grandpa that I'd never seen before, and it was the guy at the foot of my bed, and he died before I was even born. A black void. Then waking up in ER surrounded by people running around like crazy. I was cold as all heck, but in reality, apparently I was at room temperature. I have to add that it was relatively peaceful, like being wrapped in a big warm blanket. The narrator went into this topic with some trepidation, shall we say, but I must say that so far at least, these stories are somewhat comforting and reassuring. Even if the idea of passing into the great beyond does scare a little, it's nice to know that near the end we chill out a bit before we pass and might be okay with what's happening. The next perspective seems to come from someone who's quite well read on the length and breadth of what people can see. There are some researchers who've been collecting and quantifying the data of near-death experiences, or NDEs, for years now. They've created 6 categories, or stages of NDEs, that generally sum up most experiences. The first is the hellish experience. It can either be a mildly uncomfortable experience, a cold, dark, damp, loveless experience, or the traditional flames and devil experience. Some say they're drawn out of this realm by an indescribable love. Very few people recount experiencing this one. The second is this other type of experience where one has an out-of-body perspective and can travel freely. Oftentimes, this happens in an operation room where one's heart has stopped and the doctors are working to revive the patient. The individual may be able to go to other rooms in the hospital or travel across the country. If they remain in the hospital room, they do not always recognize their own bodies on the table and can feel confused. I should note that there's been a surge in NDEs since the 1960s when resuscitation techniques actually became more advanced. The third is much like many of the other comments in this video. There's another experience of blissful, warm darkness that just feels comfortable. It's an indescribable nothingness, often without memory or any inkling of consciousness at all. The next experience is similar to the last, but with an additional light that's usually far away, that emanates warmth and love and forgiveness. The individual is either attracted to this light and goes towards it, or the light itself comes to the person. It allegedly gets better and better the closer one draws to the light, and so they continue. Obviously, this is where the phrase, "don't go towards or go towards the light" comes from. The fifth experience continues where the last left off, where the person has broken through the light to the other side. They're now experiencing a love and compassion or forgiveness state of consciousness that's unlike anything they can put into words. Sometimes they encounter a sort of guide. This could be a loving, anonymous being or a religious figure. If they experience this, it's sometimes linked to their beliefs on Earth, but not always. This experience is sometimes accompanied by the most beautiful music. This being may present them to loved ones or show them a life review. This is a very common experience to those who've had NDEs. It may be at this point where the NDEer decides or is told to return to their body. There's sometimes a choice. Often they choose to because they have work left to accomplish in their lives. And I put that last part in quotes because of how many people cite that as their reasons for coming back. The sixth and final experience goes beyond the previous state of love and consciousness and is experienced only by relatively few people compared to the previous others. They say that they experience a becoming one with the universe or universal energy that unites everything and maybe a god. They've stated that they understand everything and that knowledge is known just by thinking of a topic. As a disclaimer, people have different words to describe all of these experiences, but what they typically agree on is that words themselves can't come close to explaining the encounter. For all of the aforementioned NDEs, most experiences are overwhelmingly pleasant. They lose the fear of death, and they cannot wait to return to this state. However, they know they must wait for now. The NDEs that I've looked into pretty much all fall into these categories, so I'd like to hear any others that might not. As you can tell, this interests me greatly. I do want to end this by saying that if you do wind up researching NDEs, come to your own conclusions about them. Is there a reason for someone to be pushing a certain belief on you? I have confidence that what people say about their NDEs, they themselves wholly believe to be true. Whether or not you do is up to your own judgment. There are people who make videos and give talks about NDEs that they supposedly experience, but to me, some seem to be fake and over-rehearsed. Take what you want from my spiel. This is your NDE plug out. A friend of mine described hers as deeply relaxing and that she could feel herself drifting away, but was brought back just as she was ready to leave. After that, she embraced life and death. She said she doesn't fear death anymore since it was so relaxing to experience. I had a similar experience here. As you're dying, you start feeling tired in a way you never have before, or will again until you die. The sheer act of staying alive is exhausting. But then it's all blank until I woke up from a coma a couple of weeks later. You don't even remember the actual moment of death, and it takes weeks for your mind to remember everything leading up to it. I was in a ton of pain before and after because a couple of my organs were perforated, but dying itself wasn't painful. I agree that I'm also not afraid of death. Not even just because of the pain factor, but because it feels so much less unknown to me, and there isn't time for regret when it happens. I think about death a whole lot, like an insane, worrying amount. I cry about it a lot too. I'm terrified to die. I'm terrified of what comes after, and I'm terrified of losing people I love. This thread has actually made me feel a bit better about it, so thank you. I lost my mum last year, and I remember her telling me when I was little, because I'd say it first, that she was scared to die. I'm glad to know that it isn't as bad as we both thought. I hope that this video gives this feeling to more people who feel regularly anxious about this sort of thing. I'll say that so far the majority of accounts just seem to be a gentle falling asleep feeling, so that's nice at least. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, and it is triggered by a chemical called salicylate, which is found in pretty much every food. When she was in high school, she had her first big reaction, and the school nurses refused to administer her EpiPen, adrenaline shot, until the ambulance got there. Now, obviously, having an anaphylactic reaction doesn't give you a lot of waiting time, so by the time the ambulance got to her school, she was in pretty bad shape and barely conscious. The paramedics immediately administered one of her EpiPens, called the nurses fricking idiots, and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to fade, so they gave her a direct injection of adrenaline this time. Still nothing. They gave her a second direct injection of adrenaline, and this time it hits her about 30 seconds later, all at once, and her heart fails. She stops breathing, no pulse, nothing, dead to the world. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds, she was clinically dead. And the scariest thing is, she saw nothing. She tells me that when you're losing consciousness, you can't tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids, and it felt like going into an extremely calm sleep, where she couldn't hear or feel anything, and she didn't even mind it. All despite the fact that her mother and paramedics were screaming at her to keep her eyes open, and the ambulance was flying towards the hospital. She miraculously came back to life almost 3 minutes later as they were giving her chest compressions, and the cardiologist that assessed her later stated that all the adrenaline in her body was enough to not only stop her heart, but also to restart it, with a little help from the paramedic pumping it around. But still, to this day, she can't differentiate falling asleep after a long day and dying. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. OD'd, flatlined, didn't see a darn thing. When they hit me with the narcon, I woke up really mad, ripping IVs out of my arms, cursing out the poor, amazing staff who'd saved my life. Good times. 6 years ago now, with all that crap behind me, luckily. This is my story exactly. Waking up just angry as all heck. I want to go back to sleep. I told the medics to frick off. I'm going back to sleep, and I heard the scariest, "Do not fricking go back to sleep." Like he meant it with every fiber of his being. So terrifying. I didn't get to go back to sleep. I was on loads of morphine, so it's still really hazy, and the fact that it happened almost 6 years ago doesn't really help the memory, but I'll try to recollect as accurately as I can what happened and what I experienced. I had appendicitis, and my foster parents at the time didn't take me to the hospital until 2, almost 3 days after it had burst. I should have been dead well before they took me. Even the doctors called it a miracle. Well, I died while waiting for surgery. I had to wait for a pediatric surgeon to come in because no one else felt comfortable performing the surgery on a case this bad with a child this size. The morons took me to the adult hospital, not the pediatrics, which was 40 minutes away. I was 14, 5'3", and weighed 75 pounds soaking wet. So while I was waiting for the surgeon, I was in a room with me, the doctor, my 2 foster parents, and my grandmother, who was a residential nurse. Like I said, I was on a lot of morphine and couldn't really focus on much, and couldn't really do anything. The monitor I was hooked up to would beep really loudly from time to time, and the intervals between beeps started to decrease rapidly. Turns out I wasn't breathing. I was conscious for the most part, I just kept forgetting to breathe. Doctors had to keep nudging me so I wouldn't sleep. I just remember being really angry at this loud beeping that kept me from enjoying a nice slumber. The doctor had to step out for a second, and my grandmother assured him she could look after me for a while. Unfortunately for her, she was out of her mind with rage at my foster parents. She didn't hold anything back. My grandma is a sweet Mormon Utah without a rude bone in her body. Well, I heard quite a few FUs, pieces of crap, among other choice insults. My point is, she didn't notice I'd passed out until the monitor signaled I'd flatlined. This is the bit where I died, and it's by far the most vivid part of the experience. I remember being capable of thought, but no thoughts were in my head. I could only describe it as being conscious of my spirit, but without a body for my thoughts to be processed in. I just kind of existed without feeling, thinking, or being anything. I was floating. Honestly, at the time, it was a great feeling. I don't remember any visions of people, family, places, or anything like that. But I felt something wrap around me and comfort me. Without talking, I was assured I was okay, that there was nothing to be worried about, and at that point, my thoughts returned. I knew at that moment, without knowing how long I'd be able to keep thinking, that I had to go back. I didn't want to, but knowing that the last thing I'd see before I left mortal life was these two pieces of human garbage who'd bullied me, neglected me, and treated me like a stain that they didn't want to bother trying to clean up. That's what did it. I wanted to get back to my body, fix my fricking life so I could go back and live with my bio parents and feel loved again. In that moment, that's all I cared about. And then I sort of willed myself back. Doctors had tried to resuscitate me but failed. Everyone was shocked when I woke up, and seeing the tears in my grandma's eyes after thinking she had lost me, that did it. I fixed my life. I reinvented myself and threw out all of my anger, depression, rage, and everything else that put me in Brent and Karen's home. Honestly, the only anger I felt, the burning hatred kind that makes me want to do anything possible to release it, in the last 5-ish years since I moved from their home, is when I think about them and how they're still fostering youth in custody, and probably pulling the same crap with those kids. I live about an hour away from where they are now, and I have to restrain myself from driving up there, kidnapping those kids and taking them to the authorities with an explanation of why. The only reason I haven't done that is because I've tried telling the authorities what kind of people they are. I guess the words of a juvenile screw-up don't stack up against the lies from people who've practiced this crap for years. Anyway, sorry for the rant at the end. I know that wasn't entirely what the question was, but it felt good to type out. Thank you for asking this question. It's been surprisingly therapeutic talking about it. It means a lot to me even if you have no idea who I am. I'm by no means perfect, but working every day for a better life. I'm actually studying law and criminology because I want to join the police force and work with kids like me and try to help them understand that it gets better. And this is the other major recurring NDE, the outer body experience. It might sound like a movie trope, but it's quite lovely that your love for your family and desire to fix things was what brought you back as well. I hope you can help out as many people like your old self as possible with the great second chance that you were given. I know 3 people that have been clinically dead and have come back. What they described is something much different than what people are talking about here. They all said, if you paraphrase, that it feels as if you're passing out. Someone compared it to ODing or whippets, nitrous oxide. A feeling of your conscience slowly getting focused into one point in the exact middle of your head, while your limbs lose feeling in a tingling, pleasant way, and then you lose consciousness. One girl said that when she came back into conscience, she was hallucinating because she had no idea what was going on, and she started dreaming of something safe, which was her mother hugging her in a warm bed. I coded after surgery. I remember being able to see and hear everything and understand what was happening, but I couldn't physically feel anything. It was deeply unsettling. I'm going to have to speak for my dad here. He passed away a few years back. I wrote this out a while back actually, but maybe this will be a relevant place for it to be as well. Dad was fearful in his last days. He had been to the hospital many times, and every single time he came close to death. What he remembered didn't reconcile with what most people report when having a near-death experience. He, in fact, had a lot of bad experiences. One in particular was where he relived a day 3 times in a row where doctors sedated him, but he was still fully aware of what was happening to him. He could hear the conversations, feel the pain, feel the choking and suffocation. When I saw him the next day, he had tears in his eyes as he tried to communicate a question on how many days he'd been gone. When I told him one day, he was confused and it took him a while to wrap his head around it. He thought he'd gone to hell and this was his eternal punishment. He pondered for a long time on what he could have done to deserve that as a punishment. He didn't even want to be in the hospital. He hated them his whole life, and that experience made him hate hospitals even more. Dad's last trip, via ambulance, he actually walked out to the ambulance and it wasn't because of the usual shortness of breath, it was because of chest pains. I was sure this was going to be a short stay and he'd be back soon again. During this last stay, he experienced more sedation, more hallucinations, and more disorientation. I went to visit him every single day to get an update on his status. One night in particular, they had trouble getting his heart rate down. It was steadily beating at about 160 and would calm to 120 or so before going back up to 160. It wasn't looking good for him. Then, the next time he was up, I walked in right around his dinner time. He couldn't wait to talk to me, but he could barely talk. It took all of his effort and energy, but he had some things to say. He said, "Son, I know without a doubt that there is an afterlife." I said, "Really?" He nodded. "How are you so sure? You've been seeing things on the ceiling and all kinds of hallucinations." "That wasn't me. I wasn't here." "You weren't here?" "I was there." "Okay, well, did you see anyone you knew?" He shook his head, no. "It's not like that. You can see souls being born into life, and it's the most beautiful thing you can see. Everyone has their own color and they're trying to get to white. Trying to get to white? He nodded again. Yeah, time doesn't exist there. Time is here because of us, and we're here because of time. I should have done more. He looked at his hands. I could have been another Jimmy Page. He was referring to his skill as a guitarist. I could have done more. But you were the greatest dad, and… He smirked a little to indicate that this wasn't what he meant. Do more and do everything you can. So, like carpe diem? Seize the day? Yeah, do everything you can. Don't worry about the consequences. Everyone finds their way. People worry too much about the consequences. Just do good and do as much as you can. Everyone eventually gets there. Tell the family. Can I tell everyone? Yeah, tell everyone. Okay, Dad. I'll tell everyone. Dad nodded in agreement. I could tell he was tired by this time. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. This was the last conversation that I had with him. I miss him terribly, and I've been trying real hard to find myself again after his passing. It's been a long time, and I've been able to cope with it enough to finally write this all out. I hope it finds someone that needs to hear it. Not mine, but the head of my program was in a horrible car accident. She was dead for a few minutes on the scene while paramedics worked on her. She said it was the most amazing feeling she's ever experienced. It was blank nothing. But that was perfectly fine, and she felt a comfort she can't even explain. She remembers being angry at the man working on her when she finally came back to her body because she wanted to stay there. She told us she can't wait to experience it again and when it's really her turn. I'm really pleased this resonated so strongly with so many of you. I wanted to add some detail about her. She's not religious in the slightest, and she actively squashes our ghost stories and crap, like the ones we get from the mortuary students, because she only believes in tangible things. So she fully turned me into a believer in this sort of experience. I felt it's important I make a distinction that she was very adamant about when telling us this story. She's not advocating for self-deletion. She stressed that she wasn't telling us she's trying to reach this place again, but that when it was her time, she was going to be comfortable embracing it. What high school prank made you realize, oh, we went too far? So the senior class 2 years ahead of me forked the lawn in front of the school. That's a classic, right? Well, they took it a bit further. Instead of buying plastic forks in bulk, the seniors, for their whole school year, methodically pocketed the metal silverware for lunch and breakfast. Not every piece every time, but just enough that the lunch staff would think it was accidental loss. We have a small class size, so kids would bust their own trays by dumping the scraps into a big trash can, and sometimes people would forget to take their silverware off first and they'd get lost. We had regular announcements at lunch reminding us to make sure we didn't throw away the utensils. So in this massive conspiracy that only they knew about, they collected hundreds of metal utensils. The night before their last day of classes, they snuck into the school grounds and methodically stuck hundreds of forks, knives, and spoons into the grass a foot apart each. To make it worse, one of the two custodians had recently been fired, and the remaining custodian was an older guy who was perfectly kind and in an ideal world should have retired sooner. He had to pick them all up by himself. I heard one of the teachers came in early and helped him a little bit, and saw the custodian had tears falling down his cheeks. Spraying people with Nair hair remover. A group of kids staged a kidnapping one time. They borrowed a van and drove it in front of a busy shopping center. One guy, pretending to escape, jumped out the trunk all wrapped up in duct tape. To the horror of all the bystanders, the van stopped, two kids ran out and recaptured the escapee, and drove off. The cops had to go to their homes when the van was identified, and they had a lot of clearing up to do. Had a mate in a neck brace for a year because he and another mate would frequently push each other into things like walls, railings, and other things as a joke. The other mate decided to one-up him by pushing him down a flight of stairs. Okay, did the person who pushed him win that particular prank war or lose it? It kinda feels like he achieved the greatest amount of effect with his shove, so maybe he'd call it a victory? But let's not have a sequel to that. A kid decided to post on Facebook that he had a piece and he was going to go out in a blaze of glory at the school the next day. Then he didn't show up. The lockdown lasted 6 hours past the final bell, until they found this kid who wasn't actually packing heat. When I was a freshman, there was a tree that was planted when the school was founded. The seniors destroyed it and everyone was really angry at them. There was legend in my school of a senior class, before I was a freshman, who had dumped whole buckets of crickets into all of the school's garbage cans. Fast forward, and a fight broke out at lunch, and a student was knocked into one of the garbage cans, and thousands of crickets spilled onto the concourse, causing a massive riot. I'm talking about mobs of kids leaving the school. The school was infested with crickets for years. At my high school, when I was a freshman, a group of seniors had broken into the school the night before, with hundreds of bottles of lubricant to grease up all of the staircases in the school. Like 15 kids went to the hospital. One kid cracked his head open and had to be rushed to the ER. A guy in my school had a crummy old car that the lock was broken on and could easily be put in neutral and pushed around. The steering still locked, so mostly kids would push it into a parking space ahead or behind of it. One day they pushed it and it got away from them and it damaged a teacher's car. The kids owned up to it, but considering the owner was so sick of his car being messed with, he called the police. Turns out moving a car a few meters is considered vehicle theft around here, and 3 kids were charged and expelled. Someone let a greased pig loose in the school. It basically ran around and was pretty funny. The teachers did try to catch him, but basically they opened doors and figured the pig would run outside. The janitor went full caveman and killed the pig with a broken broom handle. Blood all over the floor. The janitor was fired that day. This is around a week after the Parkland shooting in Florida. Some freshmen thought it would be a cool idea to bring in a BB pistol during school hours. All the staff thought he was an actual school shooter, and there were lockdowns with everyone ready to throw some heavy books at the first person who came into their rooms. This kid got expelled, and some say that he got sent to juvie. I should have probably provided more context. The guy was planning to play a prank on a friend of his by pulling out said piece. And that's how I spent 3 hours in my chem class panicking. Also, how the staff realized. A year before I transferred to a school, I learned that some seniors greased the steps with baby oil, causing students to slip and fall, including teachers, one of whom was several months pregnant. The principal ordered that they do not get to walk for graduation. There was this whole mess with the parents fighting to get the punishment overturned. Some of the students got punished and others got to walk for graduation. The parents were like, "No one got seriously hurt and it was just a prank." But seriously? At high school, someone in my year group decided it would be funny to run and tackle a bin that was leaning on a pole. He then pretended to be unconscious, and as the group of students watched on, rumors started to go around that he had jumped off the second-story walkway and tackled the pole in midair, and then fallen to the ground. He continued to pretend to be unconscious, and as soon as the ambulance arrived to check on his injuries, he suddenly jumped off and ran into the distance and out of the school. Seniors in my school locked all of the exits with bike locks and pulled the fire alarm. They were charged. A guy in my class put a tack on a chair like in old cartoons. When a classmate sat in said chair, it was not funny. A couple of underclassmen crashed a wholesome senior prank and ruined it. The original prank was spray painting the graduating class year all over the building in washable paint, but these kids came by after they were done and did swears and slurs. The graduating class almost didn't walk until parents kept complaining that their kid or kids weren't at fault. They ended up having to do whatever they did to cover up the writings, and there was still a pillar with a Johnson on it a few weeks afterwards. When I was a freshman, the senior prank was releasing farm animals into the school. A couple had to be put down because of injuries they sustained while running loose. And my senior year, someone crapped on the cafeteria floor and then surrounded it with some sort of clear oil. One of the janitors got hurt trying to clean it up. I'm all for funny pranks, but this was just vandalism and cruelty. In my senior year, my genius classmates thought it would be a good idea to take all of the books out of the library and make a giant book mountain. Needless to say, we spent about 7 hours learning the Dewey Decimal System. I was livid when the administration forced our whole class to resort the books, even though it was 3 idiots who made the whole mess. Someone bought multiple bottles of this stuff called liquid ASS, and absolutely poured like 10 bottles of the stuff in the men's restroom. It was truly the smell of putrid, rotting, dead elephant doo-doo. It was horrendous. If I smelled a dead body, it would be the second worst thing I've ever smelled. It was that bad. Our poor janitor was assigned to clean it up, so he walked in and immediately projectile chucked all over the bathroom and quit the job on the spot. We were now out a janitor, and the mess now had the addition of his stomach contents on top of 10 bottles of liquid butt. It took a while to find a new janitor, so the vom just sort of sat there for a week and was basically a biohazard at that point. The new janitor eventually cleaned the mess in a full bodysuit, but even after bleaching everything, we could still smell it for over 6 months. They had to permanently remove the front door to that bathroom. The narrator is mildly curious about how bad this stuff could really smell, but there were multiple follow-on comments about how this particular product has resulted in expulsions and entire areas of schools being condemned. So I guess it must be pretty bad. And having just checked online, I can see that it's still being sold despite all of this. During one of my siblings' tenure, a few students broke into the gymnasium and turned hoses onto the basketball court. Completely ruined everything as it ran a good part of the night. I believe they caught and expelled all of them. And my class had a few people superglue as many door locks as they could reach. That really made everyone happy. Why the old carry the teacher's Volkswagen into the quad prank that at least only caused some inconvenience and not property damage became a thing of the past, I'll never know. Someone shot out a bunch of windows at my high school, much more aggressive than the staircase covered in little cups of water. Someone put a couple of dead fish in the laundry dryer at my boarding school. Also had a 3-year string of phantom poopers who would just take random number 2s in places like corridors, urinals, and other things. Must have been different people because you can only be there for 2 years at a time. Most people do 1. Someone put their own number 2 under a teacher's desk. For mine, a guy found a dead pigeon and the class decided it would be fun to hide it inside a hardcover folder that a teacher left on her desk. The only problem was that the pigeon would bulge the folder, so they had no better idea than to put it inside and then stomp the folder, and by extension pigeon, flat. When the teacher, who was preggers at the time, opened the folder, she yelled in terror and fainted. They took her out to an ambulance, and on the next day the principal informed the class that the teacher lost the baby, and that they were lucky if she didn't press any charges. Needless to say, they never told anyone whose idea it was or who participated in the prank. I wouldn't really call this a prank, but a kid once wrote the name of another kid in his own number 2 on the toilet wall. This was a fate worse than death for the unsuspecting victim. Cries of derision could be heard throughout the building. Malicious rumors were spread for weeks. The poor kid was subjected to a social death sentence. A dead man walking. It wasn't until a fateful rainy Thursday afternoon after PE that the wrongly accused was exonerated when the real crapasso fell victim to his own hubris and was caught brown-handed in the act of fecal graffiti. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Someone slipped Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds into a teacher's coffee. He was tripping. I think back on it now and I feel sad for him. I broke into my friend's middle school email account in the middle of the night to send his current email address a message from the future. The message was inspired by that one prank from The Office where Jim sends Dwight faxes from the future about the coffee being poisoned. My dumb butt took it one step further and said that my friend needed to stop me and my other friend from playing the piano at break, as otherwise a bomb would go off. My friend took this seriously and alerted a teacher, who immediately knew it was me. Yes, the police were called and my butt was nearly suspended, and I was grounded for a month by my parents. Going back about 15 years ago, a group of 10 to 13 senior kids decided to try and raid our community school and literally rip off all the tube lights, bending all the ceiling fans, smash some walls, among other things. There was quite a substantial amount of damage. At the time, CCTVs weren't all that famous or used, so it was difficult to identify. But luckily, there were some eyewitnesses, and the boys and their parents were immediately summoned. Kids were suspended, and parents were asked to foot the bill. Oh, and the kids were named and shamed in front of the whole community. One guy from my school sprayed some pepper spray in the air during class because he thought it'd only make everyone's eyes sting a bit. Ended up with some students almost suffocating to death, the whole floor getting evacuated, and the guy getting expelled. This was actually in middle school. The bathrooms had particularly low ceilings. One day, some kids went into the girls' bathroom during class time, I guess when the least amount of people would be in there, and somehow managed to get a chair up into the ceiling tiles. Many girls knew they did this, and we all thought it was pretty funny. We forgot about the chair for about a week until it came crashing down onto a girl who was using the loo. This girl was very frail and super underweight. It came down and knocked her out. The school went on lockdown while the paramedics took her to the hospital. Luckily, she was fine. They locked the bathrooms the rest of the year and only opened them between classes. Many kids would go to the nurse to use the bathroom when they couldn't hold it in class. They put toilet paper in every tree. It's been 2 years and the toilet paper is still there in some trees. Some guys thought it would be funny to put a 6-pack of beer and a doobie in my trombone case during class. Fricking everyone saw them do it, but I got caught with it. A guy at my school broke into the teacher's lounge and microwaved ghost pepper popcorn. They thought it would just make everyone's eyes water a little bit. They basically maced everyone in the tiny compact hallway that the teacher's lounge was in. The school has no idea who did it, but classes in that hallway had to be relocated. This all happened a couple of years before I started high school, but someone released thousands of crickets into the building. They're still in the air ducts and we can't get them out. All of the air vents have been locked shut until a solution is found. What is it with this particular prank that's made it come up more than one time? Where do people buy all these living invertebrates from? Is it a freaking bait and tackle shop that's just doing the motherlode of all business one time a year? What a prank to pull, decimating your school for years to come. Maybe not the coolest move, guys. For a senior prank at my high school, a group of kids stole a ton, if not all, of the bathroom stall doors. While the administration was trying to figure out who did it or how to replace all the missing doors, they had makeshift plywood doors installed. They eventually caught the kids who did it and formally charged them with theft and a few other things. It was pretty genius, though. To pay the legal fees, the kids got a crapload of t-shirts printed with the phrase, "I prefer the plywood," and most of the school bought them in solidarity. So, all in all, kind of a heartwarming ending to a too-far situation. In my brother's school about 10 years ago, apparently these seniors tried to prank their teacher by putting 3 pills for male performance in his coffee. Legend has it he taught with a chair blocking his groin the entire time. During every winter, this giant flock of seagulls would always show up at my high school and hang out around campus until springtime. The majority of students ate lunch outside in this huge central courtyard. The seagulls were so annoying and constantly hovering and pretty much begging for food. It was also common to get your food stolen by one if you weren't looking. One day, a fellow student had some string in his backpack. So he took 6 feet or so of string, tied a bite-sized piece of pizza to one end, and an empty 20-ounce soda bottle to the other. We then proceeded to throw the contraption into a group of seagulls. We never thought they'd fall for it. One seagull swallowed the pizza and started to fly across campus with the string and bottle floating behind him, hanging from his beak. The rest of the seagulls freaked out and were flying behind him as if they were chasing him. The funniest part was that a random female student looked up, saw what she believed to be a floating empty soda bottle and screamed in horror, "Oh my god, that bottle is floating!" The seagull then voided its stomach of the pizza string contraption and went about his life unharmed. We felt really bad after that and decided to not prank the seagulls anymore. As an update, a few days later, some younger kids, freshmen, tried to mimic our little prank. Except it all went wrong for them. The seagull fell for the bait, but ended up getting caught in a tree. The freshmen then started to panic, fearing they'd be in trouble if caught, and had to boost each other up to free the seagull from the tree. The seagull was fine and flew away, but after that, the pranking of seagulls came to an official end. Seniors killed a deer, stuffed it in a hockey bag, and dumped the carcass in the stairwell. Some seniors came in at night and moved all the desks and whiteboards so the classrooms were now set up outside. School was outside the next day. The school made them clean up at the end of the day, and they repeated the same prank 5 more times. My old high school had a rivalry with another one in the same district. Years ago, the football teams would play pranks on each other. They escalated to the point of the other high school killing a black cat and hanging it from a tree at our school. Our mascot was panthers. Someone placed posters of anime tentacle material around the school in various locations. A separate group of guys took everything out of a classroom and put it all on the roof. The school didn't tolerate end-of-year pranks after that. I coated my desk with hand sanitizer and set it on fire, and told my teacher my desk was doing that thing again. A girl a year or two above me sent this kid in my year a photo of her in a state of undress, and not just a regular one. She was putting her fist inside herself. He sent it around to everyone, and someone printed it off hundreds of times and put it up all around the school. Not necessarily a school prank, but childish nonetheless. I was in the car business, and a couple of guys went back and forth pranking each other's cars. I don't remember the second to last move, but the final one was a little over the top in my opinion. The finisher decided he'd had enough and removed the metal bottom door plate on an older car and lined the underneath with sardines. Once he screwed the plate back on, no one could figure out where that stink was coming from. We didn't all hear until later what he actually did, but the guy he did it to ended up selling his car at a loss because he couldn't get rid of the smell. I had friends that would dry dock and upper deck. Dry docking is flushing all of the water out of the commode by turning the water off. Proceed to take a nasty number 2 without water. It's an awful cleanup. Upper decking is removing the top of the toilet, going number 2 in the upper tank, and waiting for someone to discover it. Yeah, my friends are jerks. The kids at my school nominated the weird homely girl for prom queen. When I was a freshman, the seniors hung up a blacklist everywhere in the building, which depicted all the people, mostly freshmen, they hated for no specific reason. On their last day, all of them were completely wasted. They started chasing all the people whose names and pics were on the blacklist, tied them up and brought them to the stage, while the rest of the school sat downstairs, being the audience. They embarrassed these people on the stage. They poured water over them and pushed their wet heads into flour and other stuff that got sticky with the water. Some of the victims got over it fast and laughed about it later, while some broke down crying, not ever wanting to go back to school again. Later, we all had to talk to our teachers about this and tell them how we felt about it. I wasn't on that blacklist, but I knew some of the students who were. It didn't seem like it was about fun anymore. By the time I was a senior, we weren't allowed to do anything of the sort anymore, so we just threw some water balloons at the other kids. It was a hot summer's day, so everyone actually liked it. My brother's senior class decided it'd be a fun prank to break into school in the middle of the night. They put dead fish in lockers, shaving cream all down the halls, and broke into the main office and smashed some computers. They then egged the outside for good measure. That hallway smelled like crap for a good month afterwards. None of them faced any legal consequences because one of the kids' dads is a lawyer, but I think they lost their scholarships. Someone took all of the books out of the library and set them outside. The librarians had to spend the next few days trying to reshelve every single book. I don't know what my class did, but the class above me ran down the halls and sprayed either skunk or liquid butt everywhere. The dumb part was, they still had to go to class like the rest of us, so they had to smell that gosh-awful smell the whole day like everyone else. People gagged, some threw up. It was awful. These D-bags wanted to trick a girl who was in the special ed class to go with them to prom only to stand her up. Thankfully, it was stopped before it actually happened, but that still makes me angry to this day. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.